I'm going to guide you through each of the Odyssey's 24 books. It took me 200 hours to make this guide, so if you want more of these in the future, the best way to tell me is by liking the video or subscribing to the channel. Long intros are boring, so I'm going to do mine in 5 minutes. Let's start with the title. The word Odyssey comes from the Greek, Odysseia, which means a poem about Odysseus. We find out in book 19 that the name Odysseus means man of pain. This translation cuts two ways. He gives and he receives pain. The Odyssey is the sequel to the Iliad, and the Iliad tells us a story of about a month in the last year of the Trojan War. And the Odyssey picks up after the war is finished, and one of the captains in the war, Odysseus, is trying to make his way home. The Odyssey isn't a true story. As we'll see, there's a Cyclops and a sorceress in this story. But the beginning has some grip on reality. There was a Trojan War. Homer describes an area by the Hellespont as Troy. And excavations in this area have turned up bronze armor and weapons. And Thucydides, an ancient Greek historian writing a few centuries after Homer, believed there was a real war fought between Achaea and Troy. The ancient Greeks did believe that the human characters of these poems were real. They thought Agamemnon, for example, was a real king from Mycenae. The Odyssey also captures the very real sense of anarchy in ancient Greece. There was no unified Greece 3,000 years ago, like we think of a country today. It was a collection of city-states, each of them with their own governments and peculiarities, and each of them jockeying for wealth and power. We see these kings in the Odyssey speak openly and unapologetically about piracy and raiding other nation-states as legitimate ways to enrich themselves, and this captures that anarchy of ancient Greece. The characters in the Odyssey recognize how difficult this instability makes their lives too. We see repeating phrases throughout the Odyssey. Each time Odysseus lands in a new place, he asks, what are they here? Violent, savage, lawless, or friendly to strangers, God-fearing men? So much of the Odyssey hinges on this idea of hospitality. The Greeks called it xenia. There was a whole code about how to receive and respect your guests. In the anarchy of ancient Greece, you relied on the code of xenia to travel safely anywhere. The Iliad and the Odyssey were written by the poet Homer. Nobody knows anything about Homer. Ancient scholars all seem to think he was blind, a blind bard, but nothing beyond that. Scholars don't know if Homer wrote the poems down. They don't even agree if he was a single person. This field of study is called the Homeric question. Who was Homer? To ground us quickly in the timeline, when we learn about ancient Greece in school, we're almost always learning about this period around 400 BC. This is when the city-states like Athens and Sparta are so powerful. And it's right around when famous Greeks like Pericles and Socrates are alive. Homer writes the Iliad and the Odyssey about 300 years before that. The foundational texts of ancient Greece are these two Homeric poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and two poems by Hesiod, which are written around the same time called the Theogony and Works and Days. I've done a previous video about them. The Trojan War is a historical event, dates about 500 years earlier to 1200 BC. And Odysseus was making his way home right after this Trojan War. The Homeric poems were recited around Greece and Asia Minor by rhapsodes, poets. Each of these rhapsodes performed different versions of the poems, and these versions were hand-copied on papyrus and parchment. Over time, scholars consolidated these versions to canonize the official Iliad and Odyssey. The Greek of the poem is written in a meter, dactylic hexameter it's called, which is built from 6 metrical units. Each unit is either a dactyl or a spondy, but none of the English translations carry through this exact meter. My go-to translation is the Robert Fagles translation, but I've done a different video where I looked at 7 of the most popular translations of the Odyssey and made a comparison. My general recommendation is to pick whatever translation is going to motivate you to get through the poem. Before we jump into the Odyssey, I'm going to give you just a 2-minute recap of the Iliad, because the Odyssey is the sequel to the Iliad. There's a 4-hour guide to the Iliad on my channel if you want to go deeper, but I'm just going to give the most essential setup here. The Iliad takes place in about 1 month in the last year of the Trojan War. This war is being fought between the Achaeans, who are the predecessors to the Greeks, as we think of them, and the Trojans, who are a civilization living in Troy, a walled city in modern-day Turkey. The trigger of this war is the famous Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman in all of history. Helen lives in Sparta with her husband, the chieftain of Sparta, named Menelaus. The Trojan princes, Hector and Paris, visit Sparta on a diplomatic mission. Paris and Helen are love-struck, and when Paris sails back to Troy, he takes Helen with him. Menelaus, Helen's husband, is obviously furious, So he goes to his brother, King Agamemnon, who calls together all his allies to wage war on Troy. This Achaean army that Agamemnon commands is really a coalition of kings and armies of different city-states. Odysseus is one of these kings. He's the king of the island of Ithaca. The main character of the Iliad is Achilles. Achilles is the best warrior to have ever lived, but he's fiercely independent. Achilles has an argument with King Agamemnon, so Achilles decides he won't fight. Without Achilles helping them, the Greeks are nearly defeated by the Trojans. Achilles still won't fight, but he lets his best friend Patroclus fight. Patroclus is killed by the Trojan prince Hector, and this enrages Achilles, so Achilles charges back into battle and kills Hector. We don't see this in the poem, but we know from the prophecies that the fate of Achilles and Troy are sealed. Achilles dies and Troy falls. And the Greek heroes of the Trojan War, including Odysseus, have to make their way home. Book 1 of the Odyssey begins like all other epic poems with the invocation to the muse. The rhapsode, the poet, calls up to these divine deities, the muses, daughters of Zeus, to inspire him as he recites the poem aloud. And these invocations to the muse are always worth paying attention to because they give us a tease of the story we're going to hear. Sing to me of the man, muse, the man of twists and turns, driven time and again off course once he had plundered the hallowed heights of Troy. Many cities of men he saw and learned their minds. Many pains he suffered, heartsick on the open sea, fighting to save his life and bring his comrades home. But he could not save them from disaster, hard as he strove. The recklessness of their own ways destroyed them all. The blind fools. They devoured the cattle of the sun, and the sun god wiped from sight the day of their return. Launch out on his story, muse, daughter of Zeus. Start from where you will. Sing for our time too. This first line is so famous because of this word polutropos, which literally means many turns. This is an epithet for Odysseus. It's a word that describes him. We see these epithets everywhere in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Agamemnon, lord of men. Brilliant Achilles. Zeus, whose shield is thunder. In the first line of the Iliad, Homer used the Greek word menon, which means rage. And that told us so much about who Achilles is as a character. And it teased that his rage would be the propulsive force throughout the poem. The first epithet Homer gives us for Odysseus is polutropos. And Fagles brilliantly translates this word as man of twists and turns. We're going to see deception after deception from Odysseus in this poem. Homer presents Odysseus as a man who's very comfortable lying and scheming and deceiving. And these are critical ways in which he displays his wisdom. He's the favorite man of Athena, the goddess of wisdom. And even she at times is flabbergasted at his deceitfulness. And twists and turns captures this. This is the active reading of the epithet. Odysseus is twisting and turning men and gods to serve his goals. But the translation is so brilliant because it cuts passively too. The next line of the poem tells us driven time and again off course. The twists and turns perfectly capture this man's 10-year journey back home to his wife and his son in Ithaca. It's anything but a straight path home. And here we see the gods and man twisting and turning Odysseus to serve their goals. This format here is an enjambment. It's when the thought carries into the next line. And Homer and the translators use this to punctuate double meanings. Twists and turns, polutropos, has a double meaning. And that enjambment into the next line reveals the second meaning. In these opening lines, Homer tells us the many places Odysseus will pass through and the many pains he will suffer. He tells us of this man's will to live and that his entire crew will die. The ending of this invocation invites the muse to start where she will, and this is an unusual choice. In the Iliad, Homer tells the muse exactly where he wants to begin the story. By declaring exactly where he wants to start, Homer places us at the beginning of the events of the Iliad, at the clash between Agamemnon and Achilles. And then we move through the rest of the Iliad chronologically. In the Odyssey, Homer invites the muse to start where she will. And this is a sign to the audience that we are not moving chronologically. This is one of the stylistic inventions of the Odyssey. We begin in media res. which is the Latin phrase the poet Horace coined when he pointed out that Homer starts us in the middle of things. Homer plays with time in the Odyssey. We have flashbacks and flash forwards, and the time scale jumps wildly too. We cover 10 years of travel in the 12,000 lines of the Odyssey. For comparison, the Iliad was 16,000 lines and covered 1 month of time. This is one of the reasons I'm so excited for the Christopher Nolan adaptation. Time has been a theme in his screenplays in Memento and Inception and Dunkirk, and the Odyssey gives him the original source material to play with time. This invocation also gives us the first theme of the poem, the recklessness of man. And it's the first scene we drop into in Book 1. We see Zeus, the father of the gods, holding council on Mount Olympus, lamenting the recklessness of a man named Aegisthus. Ah, how shameless, the way these mortals blame the gods. From us alone, they say, come all their miseries. Yes, but they themselves, with their own reckless ways, compound their pains beyond their proper share. Look at Aegisthus now. Aegisthus is a suitor, an aristocratic man who tries to win the heart of another man's wife while her husband is away, normally at war. If he wins her heart, he'll also win much of the wealth and power of her husband's household. Agamemnon is the leader of the Achaean army in the Iliad. He sails with the Achaeans to Troy, leaving his wife Clytemnestra at home with his young son Orestes. There's immediately a parallel here with Odysseus. Odysseus sails to Troy, leaving his wife, Penelope, at home with his young son. And the relationship is even clearer because Clytemnestra and Penelope are cousins. Zeus tells us that when Agamemnon sailed home from Troy, victorious, having survived a 10-year war and winning unimaginable riches, his wife Clytemnestra and her suitor, Aegisthus, schemed to kill Agamemnon as soon as he got home. And then Orestes, Agamemnon's son, avenges his father by killing his mother and her suitor. This cycle of violence is the plot of the Oresteia, which we're reading next month. Zeus tells us very clearly what he thinks of this. He laments the recklessness of man. What was Aegisthus thinking? That he would pursue the king's wife while he was away at war and then kill him? Of course this evil would be punished. Of course Aegisthus would pay for this with his life. And time again in the Odyssey, we see man behave recklessly and suffer as a result. This cycle of Agamemnon hangs over the Odyssey from the second page of the poem when it's introduced. We'll see Odysseus, Penelope, and Telemachus all consider what lessons they should learn from the corresponding characters in the Oresteia, and what happened when their king returned home from Troy. The story looms over Odysseus because it shows him the danger of coming home. After 10 years at war and 10 years trying to survive on his way home, the greatest danger he'll face is when he lands in Ithaca. He'll have to somehow get rid of the 108 suitors, these aristocrats, dining in his house trying to win his wife Penelope's heart. Odysseus has to avoid the same death that Agamemnon faced when he returned home. This story looms over Odysseus' son Telemachus too. Orestes avenging his father is seen as justified by all the kings and gods who tell this story. Zeus himself condones this vengeance. And as Telemachus is seeing these 108 suitors eat him out of house and home while they disrespect him and disrespect his servants and disrespect his mother, he has Orestes as an example of an ideal son who defended his father's honor under similar circumstances. Will he rise to the occasion like Orestes? At Zeus's council of the gods, Athena, Zeus's daughter and the goddess of wisdom, beelines for her father Zeus to ask him to free Odysseus from the nymph Calypso, who holds him against his will on her island. This is us beginning in media res. We're dropped right into year 10 of Odysseus' journey home. He's been held captive already by Calypso for 7 years. Because the Odyssey is told out of order, I'm going to light up the nodes of this timeline each time we have a major event, so that as we move through the books one by one, you can keep track of where we are chronologically. So Athena asks her father to free Odysseus from Calypso. And Zeus's response to Athena tells us so much about the role the gods are going to play in the Odyssey. How on earth could I forget Odysseus? Great Odysseus, who excels all men in wisdom, excels in offerings too. He gives the immortal gods who rule the vaulting skies. No, it's the Earthshaker, Poseidon, unappeased, forever fuming against him for the Cyclops, whose giant eye he blinded, godlike Polyphemus, towering over all the Cyclops' clans in power. And now for his blinded son, the earthquake god, though he won't quite kill Odysseus, drives him far off course from native land. But come, all of us here put heads together now. Work out his journey home so Odysseus can return. Lord Poseidon, I trust, will let his anger go. How can he stand his ground against the will of all the gods at once, one god alone? Zeus remembers Odysseus, and he praises his wisdom, and praises his offerings too. The Homeric gods really do care about this, which humans have sacrificed the most to them. In ancient Greece, there's a belief that if you burn bones and fat of animals, and if you tip wine out from your cup, that food and drink goes to the gods. Zeus tells us he doesn't have a problem with Odysseus, it's Poseidon. Odysseus angered Poseidon when he blinded Polyphemus, the giant Cyclops, who is Poseidon's son. We'll get this full story in Book 9, but we learn here that it's Poseidon who's fuming against Odysseus. The damage isn't irreparable between Odysseus and Poseidon. Zeus tells us Poseidon won't quite kill Odysseus. If you've read the Iliad, this is your first indication that Zeus is going to play a very different role in this poem. He's implying here that Poseidon could kill Odysseus if he wanted, that Zeus would allow that to happen. In the Iliad, Zeus was iron-fisted protecting Achilles, the main character of the poem. Half a dozen gods were fuming at the destruction wrought by Achilles, but Zeus protected him because it was Zeus's will for Achilles to slay the Trojan prince Hector. That event was absolute in Zeus's master plan for the universe. And Zeus fought so aggressively against his children and his siblings to ensure that nobody touched Achilles. But here, Zeus is saying that Poseidon won't quite kill Odysseus. It's a different tone, and it shows us that the fate of Odysseus isn't important to Zeus. We know from the Theogony that Zeus must apportion honor to gods and to men, and Odysseus has angered a very powerful god in Poseidon. Zeus is going to give Poseidon this space to reclaim that honor, even if it comes at the expense of Odysseus. So Zeus won't directly stop his brother, but he'll work with the other gods to make a plan to help Odysseus. And before they make that plan, Zeus finishes with this: Lord Poseidon, I trust, will let his anger go. How can he stand his ground against the will of all the gods at once, one god alone? There's a strain of Homeric scholarship that thinks the Iliad and the Odyssey were not written by the same person. Some scholars have deduced this from the language in the poems. These scholars see different word choices between the poems and deduce that there's a significant span of time between the two works based on this word choice. I don't read Greek at nearly a high enough level to have a point of view on that. But if I'm looking at this as a piece of translated English literature, this character voice here of Zeus is not the same Zeus as in the Iliad. Zeus here is counting on Poseidon to bend to the collective will of the Olympian gods, saying that no one god alone can stand his ground against the rest. But we know there is one god who can do that, Zeus. We know this because he told us in the Iliad. When Zeus makes a plan to bring the war between the Trojans and the Achaeans to an end, he tells the gods that no matter their will, they cannot interfere with his plan, and he threatens them with his strength. Come, try me, immortals, so all of you can learn. Hang a great golden cable down from the heavens. Lay hold of it, all you gods, all goddesses too. You can never drag me down from sky to earth, not Zeus, the highest, mightiest, king of kings, not even if you worked yourselves to death. But whenever I'd set my mind to drag you up in deadly earnest, I'd hoist you all with ease, you and the earth, you and the sea, all together, then loop that golden cable round a horn of Olympus, bind it fast and leave the whole world dangling in mid-air. That is how far I tower over the gods. I tower over men. This is the Zeus of the Iliad. He is the most powerful being in the cosmos, and he knows it. It comes through in the tone of his speeches. But Zeus is a different character in the Odyssey. He'll let the gods do as they please in this poem to give them honor. The 6th line of the Iliad tells us the will of Zeus was moving toward its end. So much of that poem hinged on the divine order that Zeus protects, but that will is absent in the Odyssey. If anything, the divine aspect of this poem is the cunning of Athena pitted against the rage of Poseidon. So with Zeus's blessing, Athena begins her plan. She'll send the messenger god Hermes to free Odysseus from the nymph Calypso. And Athena will go to Odysseus' son, Telemachus. These first 4 books are the Telemachia, the story of Telemachus. In these 4 books, Athena goes to Telemachus, and we find him surrounded by suitors in his home. He tells us all the nobles who rule the islands round about, and all who lord it in rocky Ithaca as well. Down to the last man they court my mother. They lay waste my house. And mother, she neither rejects a marriage she despises, nor can she bear to bring the courting to an end, while they continue to bleed my household white. Soon, you wait, they'll grind me down. We'll see the rambunctious behavior of these suitors, and how disrespectful they are to Telemachus and the members of his household, and how they dishonor his father's memory. But there's a real financial dimension to this too. Odysseus' wealth is measured in the size of his herds and the stock of his wine. And these suitors have decimated these resources. They feast each day on Odysseus' cattle and pigs, and they drink his wine, and these stocks are running low. The suitors are physically devouring Telemachus' inheritance, and his mother won't send them off. She can't. She's still highly desirable. We hear that she's very beautiful, and we know she has the same cunning as Odysseus, and men are drawn to her wit. But besides the vanity and the flattery of having 108 men courting you for marriage, she has an opportunity to remain in power in Ithaca. Whomever she remarries can consolidate the power once held by Odysseus, and she can rule beside that man. If she sends off the suitors and stays with her son Telemachus, this puts her and Telemachus in a dangerous position. The men will fight to challenge Telemachus' power. Telemachus has been passive in all of this. He sees the suitors devouring his inheritance, and he feels like there's nothing he can do about it. He's so down on himself when we meet him that he's questioning if he's even the legitimate son of Odysseus. Mother always told me I'm his son, it's true, but I am not so certain. Who on his own has ever really known who gave him life? There's a reading of these lines which is Telemachus questioning the fidelity of his mother Penelope to Odysseus, that maybe Telemachus was born out of an affair. But there's nothing in the poem that indicates Penelope isn't faithful. She's the very archetype of the faithful wife. So I read this passage as Telemachus not seeing any of Odysseus in himself. He's heard stories of his father his whole life, and he knows what a great man he is, but he feels so weak by comparison. The goddess Athena sees Telemachus in this position, and she knows that she will help to bring Odysseus home. But she wants to give Telemachus this opportunity to win some honor for himself. She tells him to call an assembly tomorrow and tell the suitors to scatter, and that he should sail to Pylos in Sparta to search out any information about his father. And she tells him that when he returns, he needs to deal with these suitors. Think hard, reach down deep in your heart and soul for a way to kill these suitors in your house, by stealth or in open combat. You must not cling to your boyhood any longer. It's time you were a man. Haven't you heard what glory Prince Orestes won throughout the world when he killed that cunning, murderous Aegisthus, who'd killed his famous father? Athena is setting up so clearly the parallel between Telemachus and Orestes. Will Telemachus avenge his father and kill the suitors? A lot of readers find it strange that we start the Odyssey without Odysseus. We start with the suitors. Homer does this to show us what's at stake. We're opening the story with the villains, and we're seeing the destruction they'll bring to Odysseus' household. If the suitors are left unchecked, they'll push Penelope into a marriage she doesn't want, they'll threaten Telemachus, and they'll kill Odysseus. The first scene in the palace of Odysseus shows Telemachus and his weakness with the suitors. So much has been said about the character of Odysseus, but today I think the character arc of Telemachus feels the most relevant. He's a young prince who must earn his throne, defend his mother, and avenge his father. He's the same basic archetype of Hamlet, Paul Atreides in Dune, and Simba in The Lion King. They're all princes who defend their mother, avenge their father, and kill the usurper who sits on their throne. Book 2 begins with a speech from Telemachus to the suitors. Athena tells Telemachus he needs to take control of his household and send the suitors home. And this speech doesn't go well. Rhetorically, it's a weak speech. Telemachus talks a lot about how he feels about the injustice of the suitors. But he doesn't make an argument for why the suitors should leave. And with the elders in attendance, he doesn't argue convincingly for why they should care about this. And at the end of the speech, he's so frustrated, he throws the scepter down to the floor and bursts into tears. This speech gives us a baseline of how the Ithacans regard Telemachus at the beginning of the poem. Homer tells us the assembly pitied Telemachus. They still see him as a boy, reeling from the loss of his father. And the suitors toss his concerns aside. There are two lead suitors, Antinous and Eurymachus, and they both give their own speeches in response, which are much more effective than the speech we just heard from Telemachus. The suitors are just a bit older than Telemachus, but you feel that age difference in the exchange. The suitors feel like men, but Telemachus feels like a boy. Antinous tells us the story of Laertes' shroud. This is one of Penelope's great deceptions. Laertes is Odysseus' father, and he's an aging man. Penelope tells the suitors that she cannot remarry until she's woven a shroud for Laertes, so he'll have proper funeral honors when he dies. By day, she weaves the shroud, and by night, she unweaves it. And she deceives the suitors for 3 years like this, until one of her maids tells the suitors and they catch her. And Eurymachus picks this up, again very effectively rhetorically, and he argues that Penelope's refusal to marry one of the suitors and the deception of the shroud has been unjust. From the suitors' point of view, they've put their lives on hold for years to try to win Penelope's heart. And Eurymachus shows there's a real cost to this. None of the men have courted other women in this time, and Penelope has tied all 100 of them up for years while she waits to make her decision. Again, this is a good baseline for us to see Telemachus unable to convince the men with his words. But we also see the hubris that will undo these suitors. When he fails rhetorically, Telemachus threatens them, and they brush it off. Telemachus says, "I'll cry out to the everlasting gods in hopes that Zeus will pay you back with a vengeance. All of you destroyed in my house." And Zeus hears this prayer and immediately sends an omen. 2 eagles that slash each other above the assembly. And the great omen reader, Halitherses, interprets the omen. "Hear me, men of Ithaca. Hear what I have to say, though my revelations strike the suitors first of all. A great disaster is rolling like a breaker toward their heads. Clearly, Odysseus won't be far from loved ones any longer. Now, right now, he's somewhere near, I tell you, breeding bloody death for all these suitors here. Pains aplenty, too, for the rest of us who live in Ithaca's sunlit air." There's going to be warning after warning and prophecy after prophecy that Odysseus is coming home, and nobody will believe it. Penelope and Odysseus' most loyal servants so sorely miss Odysseus that they can't bring themselves to hope. And the suitors are so prideful that they'll ignore clear signs like this from the gods that foreshadow their doom. Telemachus leaves the assembly and prepares a ship. He sails to Pylos to visit the old king Nestor, who fought alongside Odysseus at Troy, to see what he knows of his father's fate. In Book 3, we get the first of the recognition scenes in the Odyssey. Identity is one of the themes in this poem. How do you recognize someone you haven't seen in 20 years? How do you recognize someone you've never met? We'll see 5 of these scenes in the Odyssey as Odysseus reveals himself to his son, his dog, his maid, his wife, and his father. But there are also recognition scenes with the goddess Athena. In the Homeric poems, the gods appear in disguise. They take the forms of human beings. In the Odyssey, Athena gives Telemachus courage by taking the shape of 2 old men, Mentes and Mentor. Both of these men knew Odysseus, and her role as mentor, specifically, guiding Telemachus, is how we get the English definition of the word mentor, someone who gives guidance. Telemachus suspects that he's been visited by a god, disguised as mentor. This is what gives him so much confidence to challenge the suitors at council. and to travel to Pylos in Sparta to seek information about his father. When Telemachus arrives at Pylos, he sees a massive festival with 4,500 men on the beach, sacrificing 81 bulls to Poseidon. King Nestor, who lords over Pylos, is Poseidon's grandson, and Poseidon is the godly patron of Pylos. The goddess Athena, disguised as Mentor, gives Telemachus the courage to walk right up to King Nestor to greet him. And you can imagine Nestor's overjoyed to learn that this young boy, who is so polite and well-spoken, is the son of his longtime friend Odysseus. At this point, Telemachus doesn't know anything about his father's time at Troy. And Nestor gives him a piece of information, that his father survived the war. They sailed off together, but there was bad weather that separated their fleets. So Nestor doesn't know what happened to Odysseus after the war. In this exchange, Nestor builds up the honor of both Odysseus and Telemachus. And no one there could hope to rival Odysseus, not for sheer cunning. At every twist of strategy, he excelled us all. Your father, yes, if you are in fact his son. I look at you, and a sense of wonder takes me. Your way with words, it's just like his. I'd swear no youngster could ever speak like you. So apt, so telling. This is an honor for Telemachus. We saw him question whether he was Odysseus' legitimate son in Book 1. Because he was questioning if he could live up to the ideal of his father. And in front of Telemachus stands Nestor, a great king who spent 10 years with his father at Troy. And Nestor is seeing something in the boy that reminds him of the father. I'm going to chart the honor of Telemachus, from the low of Book 1, when he questions if he's Odysseus' real son, to the high of Book 24. And this praise from Nestor is the first node to gain that honor. When Nestor hears of the suitors laying waste to the estate of Telemachus, he rounds on Telemachus and he challenges him. Tell me though, do you let yourself be so abused, or do people round about, stirred up by the prompting of some god, despise you now? Who knows if he will return someday to take revenge on all their violence? In this first part of the speech, Nestor's telling Telemachus, who knows if Odysseus is going to return to take revenge on the suitors? Nestor's telling Telemachus that he needs to do something about this himself. This is echoing what Athena told Telemachus when she was disguised as Mentis in Book 1, when she told him to set sail to search for news of his father, and if Odysseus doesn't turn up within a year, that Telemachus would have to kill the suitors himself. Athena, disguised as Mentis, and Nestor are planting the same milestone for Telemachus. This is going to be the ultimate marker of his transformation from boy to man. Can he win back his household, avenge his father, defend his mother, and lay waste to these suitors? And in the second part of the speech, Nestor tells him the key to accomplishing this. It's Athena. This is dramatic irony. We as the audience know that Athena is right beside Telemachus, disguised as Mentor. But Telemachus and Nestor can't recognize her. This is sowing the seeds of her reveal to them in this book. When night falls, Athena, disguised as Mentor, suggests that she should go back to the ship to sleep. And this is mortifying to King Nestor. They're his guests. It's insulting to him, to the guests, and to the gods if Mentor goes back to the ship to sleep. The host has to make a bed for them with the finest sheets and give them the finest clothes to change into. This is part of their hospitality code of Xenia, and that code is enforced by Zeus. Athena's gracious here. She tells Nestor he's right, that it's proper for the host to give his guest a place to stay. And she tells him to take Telemachus to the palace and make a bed for him. But she will go back to the ship. Under Xenia, the gods can't allow themselves to be hosted as equals by men. But she won't insult Nestor by declining his offer disguised as the human Mentor. She shapeshifts into an eagle in front of him and flies off to the ship. Amazement fell on all the Achaeans there. The old king, astonished by what he'd seen, grasped Telemachus' hand and cried out to the prince, "Dear boy, never fear you'll be a coward or defenseless, not if at your young age the gods will guard you so. Of all who dwell on Olympus, this was none but she, Zeus's daughter, the glorious one, his third born, who prized your gallant father among the Argives." This is an honor for Athena to reveal herself to Nestor, and it's immediately paying off the setup that Nestor gave us in his speech. that Athena is the key to Telemachus claiming his own honor and defeating the suitors. Nestor tells the boy that this is the same goddess who gave so much glory to his father, and by showing her favor towards Telemachus at this young age, she's destined Telemachus for greatness. This is again what makes the Telemachus character feel so modern to us. This divine favor at a young age fits the chosen one archetype that we see with Harry Potter and Paul Atreides and Anakin Skywalker. It's a divine or otherworldly blessing that will propel this character on their heroic journey. It's telling too that Athena reveals herself in this moment in front of Nestor. She did not reveal herself in front of the suitors because they're lower men. They're aristocrats of Ithaca and the surrounding islands, but they've earned no glory in war, and they've dishonored the gods by violating Xenia and overstaying their welcome in Telemachus' house. These men aren't worthy of a divine appearance. But Nestor is a great man. He's an old man, and the traditions say he fought alongside 2 generations of heroes. He fought the centaurs with Theseus, he sailed with Jason and the Argonauts, and his strategy lured the great Achilles to battle at Troy and turn the war. The Greek philosopher Aristotle talks about the virtue of magnanimity in his Nicomachean Ethics. The Greek word is megalopsychia, which comes from megas psyche, which means great-souled. A great-souled man knows that he's great, and he's most pleased to receive honors from other great-souled men. But there's no greater honor for the magnanimous Greek man than to be honored by a god. Athena is giving this honor of her revelation to Nestor, and I read this as an affirmation of his magnanimity. In Book 4, Telemachus travels by land with Nestor's son Pisistratus to visit Menelaus in Sparta. Menelaus is the king of Sparta, and he is the one who rallied the Achaeans to war at Troy after the Trojan prince Paris took Menelaus' wife Helen. His wife is the famous Helen of Troy, and on his journey home with his wife in tow, Menelaus was blown off course for years. So Nestor suggests that Menelaus might have some information about Odysseus. Maybe in his travels, he heard news of where Odysseus could be. Menelaus is able to give Telemachus one extra piece of information. He heard from a sea god that Odysseus had been taken captive on an island by the nymph Calypso, and that he had no ship and no crew to leave with. The real standout of Book 4, though, is getting to see Menelaus and Helen together. We've already heard of Menelaus' brother Agamemnon, and his terrible return home to his wife Clytemnestra. She conspired with her suitor to kill Agamemnon. And this hits close to home for Menelaus and Helen, because Clytemnestra is Helen's sister, and Agamemnon is Menelaus' brother. So her sister killed his brother. In Menelaus and Helen, we have another couple finding their way after the war. And in Book 4, we get a window into the mismatch of character between this husband and wife through their alternating stories of the Trojan War. If you've read the Iliad, getting some dialogue from Helen here is such a treat. The whole Trojan War is fought for Helen, and in the Iliad we see Helen when she comes to the Trojan ramparts to watch her lover, the Trojan prince Paris, duel with her husband, the king of Sparta, Menelaus. When she emerges from the citadel of Troy, we get a description of the hearts of these Trojan elders melting when they see her beauty. They sympathize with the love-struck Paris who invited this war, because they know that any man would be helpless in the face of such beauty. But we don't actually hear from Helen in the Iliad in any meaningful way. In the Odyssey, it's Helen's mind that makes a big impression. She enters the room with her entourage of women, takes a seat, puts her feet up on a stool, and leans over to her husband Menelaus. And before he tells her who the visitors are, she says, "That's Telemachus." Her recognition of Telemachus feels like magic. Menelaus and Nestor both spent 10 years with Odysseus, but they couldn't recognize his son on sight. Each time Helen speaks in this book, we'll see that she's doing many things at once. She's doing 3 things here with the recognition of Telemachus. She's showing her wit, she's showing specifically that she's good at recognitions, which she's going to pay off in a moment, and she's giving honor to Telemachus. Remember, this is the boy in Book 1 who felt so ashamed that he hadn't lived up to his great father that he questioned if he was his legitimate son. He then goes to Pylos, and the old king Nestor hears the wisdom of Odysseus in the speeches of Telemachus. But without ever having seen him before, Helen recognizes Telemachus on sight. This is an immense honor for the young Telemachus. He's just been recognized on sight by the most beautiful woman in the world. Now Helen and Menelaus are with the boy Telemachus, and they want to tell him great stories about his father. And these two stories, first from Helen, then from Menelaus, are going to show us who Helen is. And they're going to tell us how Helen and Menelaus are settling back into their marriage in Sparta. When Helen recognized Telemachus immediately, she showed us that she has a knack for recognitions. And she tells Telemachus a story about when she first saw Odysseus during the war. She was inside the walled city of Troy, still with her lover Paris, and Odysseus had snuck into the citadel disguised as a beggar. The depth of these alternating speeches is one of my favorite parts of the Odyssey, so I'm going to give you a longer excerpt. The first speech is Helen's. "I will tell something perfect for the occasion. Surely I can't describe or even list them all, the exploits crowding fearless Odysseus' record. But what a feat that hero dared and carried off in the land of Troy where you Achaeans suffered, scarring his own body with mortifying strokes. Throwing filthy rags on his back like any slave, he slipped into the enemy's city, roamed its streets, all disguised, a totally different man, a beggar, hardly the figure he cut among Achaea's ships. That's how Odysseus infiltrated Troy, and no one knew him at all. I spotted him for the man he was, kept questioning him, the crafty one kept dodging. And once he'd cut a troop of Trojans down with his long bronze sword, back he went to his comrades, filled with information. The rest of the Trojan women shrilled their grief. Not I. My heart leapt up. My heart had changed by now. I yearned to sail back home again. I grieved too late for the madness Aphrodite sent me, luring me there, far from my dear land, forsaking my own child, my bridal bed, my husband too, a man who lacked for neither brains nor beauty." Again, we have Helen doing three things here. First, she honors Odysseus. She says the man is so great she can't even list all the exploits crowding his record. But she'll tell us one that stands above the rest. The second thing she does is describe Odysseus' disguise as a beggar. He disfigured his own body with scars and dressed in rags to infiltrate the walled city of Troy. And nobody knew him but Helen. When Odysseus finally makes it home to Ithaca in Book 13, he's going to disguise himself again as a beggar. And remember, there are no spoilers in the Odyssey. The ancient Greeks knew these stories from birth, so the audience would have delighted in this foreshadowing here, that the beggar's disguise Helen describes is exactly the same disguise they know is coming when he returns to Ithaca. They also would have delighted at the word scarred, because the sight of a scar on his knee that he got as a child is going to give away Odysseus' disguise to his old maid in Book 19. There's a deeper level to Helen's recognition story, though. The most significant unanswered question in the Odyssey is whether or not Odysseus' wife Penelope recognizes her husband when he comes home in this beggar's disguise. Homer writes their interaction so subtly that we can't know for sure. This scene with Helen shows us that it is possible for an extremely intelligent character to see through this disguise, just like Helen claims she did at Troy. The third thing Helen's doing here is managing her husband, Menelaus. We have to remember the awkwardness of the situation. Helen ran off with Paris and started a 10-year war, which cost her husband, Menelaus, to lose so many of his best friends. And then after the war, her sister killed Menelaus' brother. Menelaus might not trust her. So she's telling us that after Odysseus hacked down a troop of Trojan men, the women of Troy wailed, but not Helen because her heart had changed. Is she telling the truth? We have no way to know. The story is unfalsifiable. There are no Trojans left to ask about it. And then she says that she had been lured to Troy by the madness of Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty. Helen's referencing here the famous judgment of Paris. 3 goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, presented themselves to the Trojan prince Paris and asked him to judge their beauty. As a gift for picking Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty promised Paris the most beautiful woman in the world. And in the myths, this is the fate that sends Paris to Sparta to lure Helen to Troy. The story of the judgment of Paris is told in the Iliad, so we know that it was real in this world. But is Helen telling the truth? We saw this all the time in the Iliad, that characters were fated to do something, but they chose to do that thing anyways. Achilles is fated to kill Hector, but from his point of view, he chooses to do this. Helen may have been fated to go to Troy, but did she choose this fate? We don't know. Only two people know, Helen and the goddess Aphrodite. When Helen blames Aphrodite for luring her to Troy, she's telling another unfalsifiable story to ease her husband's concerns. What does Menelaus think about this? He's much too great of a man to challenge her directly. He answers her with a story of his own about the Trojan horse. The backstory on the Trojan horse is that the Achaeans have been fighting for 9 years to get into the walls of Troy, and they failed. It's not the strength of Achilles or the power of Agamemnon that gets them inside. It's the trickery of Odysseus. He conceives of a large wooden horse that the Achaeans build and present as a gift to the Trojans. Then the Achaeans sail off in their ships. The Trojans think they've won. They bring the horse inside the city walls to celebrate. Achaea's greatest warriors climb out of the horse in the night, slaughter the Trojans, and open the gates to let the Achaean army, who by now have swung back in their ships, into the city. Menelaus tells a story to honor Odysseus and to answer his wife, which brings us inside the Trojan horse. There was a tale, my lady, so well told. Now then, I've studied in my time the plans and minds of great ones by the score, and I have traveled over a good part of the world, but never once have I laid eyes on a man like him. What a heart that fearless Odysseus had inside him. What a piece of work the hero dared and carried off in the wooden horse, where all our best encamped, our champions armed with bloody death for Troy. When along you came, Helen, roused no doubt by a dark power bent on giving Troy some glory. And dashing Prince Deiphobus squired your every step. 3 times you sauntered round our hollow ambush, feeling, stroking its flanks, challenging all our fighters, calling each by name. Yours was the voice of all our long-lost wives, and Diomedes and I crouched tight in the midst with great Odysseus, hearing you singing out. We're both keen to spring up and sally forth, or give you a sudden answer from inside. But Odysseus damped our ardor, reined us back. Then all the rest of the troops kept stock still, all but Anticlus. He was hot to salute you now, but Odysseus clamped his great hands on the man's mouth and shut it, brutally, yes. He saved us all. Holding on grim-set till Pallas Athena lured you off at last. There's a subtlety in this speech. Helen has just made a show of how she didn't cry when Odysseus slayed the Trojans inside the walls. She doesn't cry because she says her heart had changed, and she longed to go home to Sparta and be reunited with her husband Menelaus. And what is Menelaus's response? There was a tale, my lady. Menelaus then tells a story that comes after Helen's story, in which she tried to deceive the Achaean men, including her own husband, to lure them out of the horse to be killed. How could her story about her change of heart be true? Because after that, she tried to lure her husband to his death. And then Menelaus jabs her again in the next line. And dashing Prince Deiphobus squired your every step. At the very end of the Trojan War, Helen's lover Paris, the prince of Troy, dies. Helen then remarries his brother, Deiphobus. The common reading is that she had to remarry. The war's still going on, and she's very important politically. So her marriage to Deiphobus, a surviving prince in Troy, wasn't really a choice. And that's where this word squire is so brilliant. A squire is an assistant to someone greater than them. In calling Deiphobus a squire, Menelaus is building Helen's honor, saying she was greater than him, while also jabbing her. Remember, her speech was about her heart had changed, and she longed for Menelaus. Menelaus is pointing out, yes, but you remarried. How could she be in a political marriage out of necessity when she had such control over Deiphobus that he squired after her? The image is of Helen having the power in that relationship, and therefore of her choosing to be in that marriage. Now, it's important to say here that we still don't know if Helen is lying. We don't actually know if she tried to lure Menelaus to his death after she said her heart had changed. And the scholarly commentaries are quick to point out that it's just her word against his. But I think the poem gives us two reasons why we should believe his word. First, Nestor tells us that Menelaus never lies. And we know Nestor never lies because Athena tells us. So through transitivity, we have the word of a god telling us that Menelaus doesn't lie. Second, Helen has put forth two unfalsifiable stories, one from inside Troy before the fall, and a second speaking of her own state of mind when she absconded with Paris. But Menelaus' story is falsifiable. Odysseus was in the horse with him, and Odysseus is still alive. Athena is the goddess who stopped Helen's trickery, trying to lure them out of the horse. And Athena was just with Telemachus. The falsifiability of Menelaus' claim makes it the stronger. This interaction between Helen and Menelaus is my favorite interaction of the poem. It gives us such a depth in this relationship, showing that these characters don't trust each other. And it poses a key question. Clytemnestra kills her husband Agamemnon. Menelaus doesn't trust Helen. What reunion will Odysseus and Penelope have? Zooming back out, Telemachus has collected the information he came for. He now knows his father was alive and is being held by the nymph Calypso. He now needs to get home to Ithaca. What fate awaits Telemachus when he sails home? At the end of Book 4, the suitors realize Telemachus is missing, and that he sailed to Pylos in Sparta. The boy is becoming a man, and his threat at the council to end their suiting rings in their ears. He is now a danger to them. The suitors load a ship with men, and they'll hide it in a cove. They'll wait for his return, then ambush him at sea. In Book 5, we'll finally meet Odysseus on Ogygia, the island of Calypso. It's now been 9 years since the fall of Troy, and he's been trapped on Calypso's island for 7 years. Athena wants to bring her favorite man Odysseus home, so she goes to her father Zeus. Father Zeus, you other happy gods who never die, never let any sceptered king be kind and gentle now, not with all his heart, or set his mind on justice. No, let him be cruel and always practice outrage. Think, not one of the people whom he ruled remembers Odysseus now, that godlike man, and kindly as a father to his children. The goddess Athena is going right after her father Zeus here, asking why any man with power should be good, if he could have the same fate as Odysseus. As the father of the Olympian gods, Zeus is charged with balancing justice in the cosmos. And Athena is telling her father that the entrapment of Odysseus by Calypso is a glaring injustice. Not just an experienced injustice by Odysseus, but an example that could undermine the very notion of justice for all men. I love Zeus as a character. If I ever got to put his character in a movie, I'd play it for comedy. I imagine this guy surrounded by all his children, and they're constantly bothering him to do something, just like Athena's bothering him now. And he reluctantly says, okay, and he decrees the official fate of Odysseus. You are a messenger, Hermes, sent on all our missions. Announce to the nymph with lovely braids our fixed decree. Odysseus journeys home. The exile must return, but not in the convoy of the gods or mortal men. No, on a lashed makeshift raft and wrung with pains. On the 20th day he will make his landfall, fertile Scheria, the land of the Phaeacians, close kin to the gods themselves, who with all their hearts will prize him like a god, and send him off in a ship to his own beloved land, giving him bronze and hoards of gold and robes, more plunder than he could ever have won from Troy, if Odysseus had returned intact with his fair share. So his destiny ordains, he shall see his loved ones reach his high-roofed house, his native land at last. This is the will of Zeus. Once it's decreed, we know it will happen exactly as he says it. Calypso will let Odysseus go, But not like the king he is. She'll send him on a makeshift raft and wrung with pains. He'll make landfall on the island of Scheria, and the Phaeacians will give him enough gifts to exceed the riches he won from Troy. And with these riches, he'll finally return home. When Hermes lands on Ogygia, we get a long description of the beauty of the island. Even the god Hermes marvels at the beauty of the place. Hermes relays Zeus's will, and Calypso is furious. She tells Hermes that she's welcomed Odysseus to her paradise, and she's even offered to make him immortal and ageless. But she knows she can't change the will of Zeus. She goes to Odysseus to set him free. The queenly nymph sought out the great Odysseus, the commands of Zeus still ringing in her ears, and found him there on the headland, sitting, still, weeping, his eyes never dry, his sweet life flowing away with the tears he wept for his foiled journey home. Since the nymph no longer pleased, and the nights, true, he'd sleep with her in the arching cave, he had no choice, unwilling lover alongside lover, all too willing. But all his days he'd sit on the rocks and beaches, wrenching his heart with sobs and groans and anguish, gazing out over the barren sea through blinding tears. This line here is so famous, unwilling lover alongside lover, all too willing. It's the obvious question that this episode with Calypso begs of us as the reader. Why does Odysseus want to leave? He's in a place so beautiful, even the god Hermes marvels at it. He feasts each day with the nymph Calypso, who's described as lustrous, shining. She beds him each night, and she's offered to make him immortal. But still, he sobs and groans in anguish. Calypso herself wonders this. Much as you long to see your wife, the one you pine for all your days, and yet I just might claim to be nothing less than she, neither in face nor figure. Hardly right, is it, for mortal woman to rival immortal goddess? How? In build? In beauty? Calypso's hurt, and she's asking Odysseus what it is about Penelope that makes him want to go back to her so badly. And there's a tinge of danger here. Hardly right, is it, for mortal woman to rival immortal goddess? Odysseus is at risk of offending Calypso. Ah, great goddess, worldly Odysseus answered. Don't be angry with me, please. All that you say is true, how well I know. Look at my wise Penelope. She falls far short of you, your beauty, stature. She is mortal, after all, and you never age or die. Nevertheless, I long, I pine all my days to travel home and see the dawn of my return. Odysseus tells Calypso he's not rebuffing her for Penelope. Penelope falls far short of Calypso's beauty and stature. And he affirms the order here, that Penelope is mortal and Calypso is immortal. So Penelope cannot exceed Calypso. And he pivots the attention to the idea of home and to see the dawn of his return. There's a completeness that he's after here. He left Troy to go home, and his journey isn't finished until he gets home. He falls back on the obvious theme of the Odyssey, which is the Greek Nostos, the word for homecoming. But if I read into his response, maybe deeper than Homer or Fagles would want us to, the epithet he uses for Penelope is telling, wise. Penelope falls far short of Calypso's beauty and stature, but the descriptor Odysseus uses for her is wise. In the previous book, Book 4, when we saw the subtle mistrust between Menelaus and Helen, we wondered how Odysseus and Penelope would reunite in the Odyssey. What propels Odysseus back to Penelope? What will bring them together in the end? This descriptor here of Penelope's wisdom is telling. It's our first clue of a special connection between Odysseus and Penelope. Odysseus builds his raft, Calypso sees him off, and just like Zeus foretold, his journey is wrung with pains. Poseidon torments Odysseus on the seas, destroys his raft, and slams him into a reef. But after 2 days and 2 nights at sea, Odysseus finally makes it to land, and he beds down in a forest in a pile of leaves. In Book 6, Odysseus wakes to the sound of young girls playing with a ball, and Homer gives us Odysseus' first thought when he startles awake. He sat up with a start, puzzling, his heart pounding. Man of misery, whose land have I lit on now? What are they here? Violent? Savage? Lawless? Or friendly to strangers, God-fearing men, listen, shouting, echoing round me, women, girls, or the nymphs who haunt the rugged mountaintops and the river springs and meadows lush with grass? Or am I really close to people who speak my language? Up with you. See how the land lies. See for yourself now. We'll see this over and over again in the Odyssey, that when Odysseus lands in a new place, he wonders who the people are. And he repeats this verbatim. What are they here? Violent, savage, lawless, or friendly to strangers, God-fearing men? The paranoia is understandable. At this point, he's been traveling for 9 years. We're going to get all these stories in a little bit, but he's been trapped by a Cyclops and a nymph, and bewitched by a sorceress and the Sirens. There are supernatural threats to him in this world. And even in a land where there's no supernatural foe, there's no promise that man will be friendly either. I spoke about this in the introduction, but there's no unifying force or laws across ancient Greece. Each land is ruled by its own king, and the only protection offered to travelers is from men who abide by the hospitality code of Xenia, which is enforced by Zeus. This is why Odysseus asks if they're friendly to strangers, God-fearing men. But we're also seeing a natural distrust from Odysseus. Homer first describes Odysseus as Polytropos, a man of twists and turns. And we've already seen this cunning praised by Nestor and Menelaus. It's this cunning that won the Achaeans the war through the Trojan horse. It's this cunning that sensed the deception of Helen when she imitated the voices of their wives and tried to lure them to their death. And it's this cunning that has won Odysseus the favor of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, who has given him glory after glory in his life, and who's shepherding him home. But the curse of this cunning, which we'll see over and over again, is that Odysseus can never trust. A liar can never trust. When Calypso first comes to Odysseus to tell him he'll be freed, his response, the first words he speaks in the whole poem, are to accuse her of lying. When his raft is destroyed by Poseidon, and he's lost in the open seas, and the nymph, Ino, comes to him with a plan, his first thought is that she's lying. And when he awakes in Scheria and hears the sounds of young girls, he wonders to himself if they're lawless savages. This is the duality of Odysseus. His cunning saves his life and gives him glory, but it makes him so distrustful. And we see this distrust so clearly in Book 6, because his foil in this book is the young princess Nausicaa. She's the princess of the Phaeacians, and she's the girl whose voice Odysseus hears when he startles awake. Nausicaa is the embodiment of pure, innocent good in the Odyssey. She's described as being stunningly beautiful, just coming to marriageable age. And in her dialogue, we hear the youthful excitement of a girl who daydreams about who her husband could be. When she meets Odysseus in the forest, he's stark naked and covered in all the filth from his 2 days at sea and from sleeping in the leaves. But when he's cleaned up, she has a crush on him. She tells her friends that she wants a man like Odysseus as her husband. In their first interaction, Odysseus intuits that this young princess would have thoughts of marriage. He's trying to win her favor, so she'll help him to get clothes and a ship to get home. It's a standard pleasantry to wish a stranger a lifetime of happiness and to shower them with compliments. But Odysseus uses a very specific word to describe the happiness he wishes Nausicaa. And may the good gods give you all your heart desires, husband and house, and lasting harmony too. No finer, greater gift in the world than that, when man and woman possess their home, 2 minds, 2 hearts that work as one. Despair to their enemies, a joy to all their friends, their own best claim to glory. We're getting another bit of specificity here about what Odysseus values most in a marriage. He's telling us there's no greater gift in the world than 2 minds, 2 hearts that work as one. This is a very specific word Homer uses in the Greek called Homophrosyne. It's a rare word in the Greek that's made of 2 parts, homo, meaning same, and phrosyne, which is adapted from the root phren. This root phren had a meaning of understanding, which had connotations both of the mind, but also of a feeling that emanated from the diaphragm. This same mindedness that Odysseus describes to Nausicaa, this homophrosyne, is the thing that he had with Penelope. In Book 5, Calypso asked Odysseus why he's abandoning a goddess, and her paradise, and her offer to make him immortal. And he reassured her that it's not the standing or the beauty of his wife Penelope. Penelope is highborn, and she's very beautiful, but she can't rival a goddess. The descriptor he used for Penelope was wise. From how Odysseus tells the young girl Nausicaa of the greatest gift in the world, we know that it's not just Penelope's wit, it's their shared wit. This is their shared mind. It's the greatest gift, their best claim to glory, the joy of their friends and the despair of their enemies. Odysseus will reveal himself to Penelope in Book 23. Odysseus has been gone for 20 years, and people change in that time. Penelope will test Odysseus to make him prove his identity, but the identity is easy to establish. The deeper significance of these tests in books 19 through 23 is whether these two characters still have this singleness of mind. Homer foreshadows the events of these books for us here. When two lovers have this Homophrosyne, despair to their enemies, their own best claim to glory, we're going to see Odysseus and Penelope lay waste to their enemies, the Suitors. And Penelope's resistance of the Suitors is her greatest claim to glory. And Odysseus's destruction of the Suitors is his greatest claim to glory. And the fuel for the faithfulness and the cunning and the rage that they exact on their enemies in Book 22 is this Homophrosyne. In Book 7, Odysseus enters Nausicaa's palace and throws himself at the feet of her mother, the Queen Arete, and he begs her and her husband, the king Alcinous, to help him to get home. They observe the hospitality code, Xenia, and they agree to help him. When Odysseus enters their palace, he's astounded at the wealth. There's gold everywhere, and a garden with every fruit imaginable. And Arete and Alcinous are kind to him, and their daughter, Nausicaa, is pure goodness. And Alcinous proposes a marriage to Odysseus, and he promises a house of great wealth if Odysseus stays to marry his daughter. This is another test for Odysseus. He rejected immortality and the love of the goddess Calypso, and now he rejects the pure good of Nausicaa and the wealth of the Phaeacians. He's rejected the very best immortal and mortal futures for himself, and he's chosen to continue home, to reunite with his wife, and to risk it all for that sameness of mind, Homophrosyne. In Book 8, Alcinous, the king of the Phaeacians, gathers his people at council to call up men to crew a ship that will take Odysseus home. He hosts athletic games, and in these games, Odysseus hurls a discus much heavier and much farther than the other men. And when they feast, the Phaeacian bard sings of the Trojan War, and at Odysseus's request, he sings the story of the Trojan horse, and Odysseus is overcome with emotion. And the king, Alcinous, hears Odysseus weeping. With Odysseus ready to set sail the next day, Alcinous finally asks Odysseus directly who he is. This whole time, he never directly asked the man's name. He's intrigued after he sees the strength of Odysseus at the games, and after he sees him weeping during the war stories. So I'm sure he asks out of curiosity, but there's also a practical reality here too. Alcinous is preparing a ship to take Odysseus home, so he needs to know who the man is and where the ship is going. Odysseus begins Book 9 by praising the bard Telemachus, who's just been telling the story of the Trojan horse. And then Odysseus pivots into his own story. Alcinous, majesty, shining among your island people. What a fine thing it is to listen to such a bard as we have here. The man sings like a god. The crown of life, I'd say. There's nothing better than when deep joy holds sway throughout the realm, and banqueters up and down the palace sit in ranks, enthralled to hear the bard, and before them all, the tables heaped with bread and meats. And drawing wine from a mixing bowl, the steward makes his rounds and keeps the wine cups flowing. But now you're set on probing the bitter pains I've borne, so I'm to weep and grieve, it seems, still more. Well then, what shall I go through first? What shall I save for last? What pains the gods have given me my share? Now, let me begin by telling you my name. The speech from Odysseus is transitioning the point of view of the Odyssey. We've been in the third person point of view, with Homer as our narrator. And in this speech from Odysseus, we're transitioning to his first person account of the last 9 years of his life. This first person account is the apologoi, the story within the story that lasts from book 9 through book 12. The Odyssey as a poem gives us Odysseus' 10-year journey home from Troy. But the third-person account is only 40 days. It starts with the Council on Olympus in book 1, and it culminates in Odysseus' revenge on the Suitors in book 22. The missing 9 years of Odysseus' journey is recounted to us in this first-person apology. And as I've been doing, I'm going to populate these nodes as we go through the story so we know where we are in the timeline. The way that Homer bridges this transition from the third person to Odysseus' own accounting is so artful. Odysseus begins by profusely praising the bard Telemachus, who's just sung the story of the Trojan horse. He says there's nothing better than coming together in peacetime and sitting in accordance with order and enjoying a magnificent feast while hearing the crown of life, a bard singing his tales. This is the beauty of entertainment, a third-person experience, the suspension of disbelief and wanderings in the life of another. But Odysseus is that other. He lived the story they just heard, and his lived experience has been pain. But now you're set on probing the bitter pains I've borne. And like a bard at the start of an epic recitation, Odysseus wonders aloud where he'll begin. Well then, what shall I go through first? What shall I save for last? With these lines, Odysseus takes over for Homer, and for these next 4 books, he becomes the bard. And as we come into Odysseus' point of view, we leave behind the objectivity of the third person. We'll no longer ping-pong between the characters in the poem to balance their perspectives of an event. When we enter Odysseus' point of view, scholars can no longer trace his journey on a map. The geography doesn't make sense. And his foes in these 9 years are seldom men. They're monsters and sorceresses and gods. The apology of Odysseus transports us to this supernatural plane. Some of the most interesting stories in literature involve an unreliable narrator. And here we have Odysseus, deceitful, cunning, a man of twists and turns. He's literature's first unreliable narrator. In books 9 through 12, Odysseus is going to tell us each of these stories on the screen now. I'll string them all together so we keep the narrative of the poem, but I'm going to dwell on 2 of them in particular. These 2 stories reveal something special about the character of Odysseus. After he left Troy, Odysseus' first stop was in the city of Ismarus, home to the Cyclops people. Odysseus and his men sacked the city and hauled the plunder to their ships. But his men lingered too long, and the Cyclops signaled for help. And their allies attacked Odysseus and his men, and they barely escaped. They next come to the land of the lotus eaters. The lotus is a flowering fruit that makes you forget your desire to go home. The lotus eaters had no notion of killing my companions, not at all. They simply gave them the lotus to taste instead. Any crewmen who ate the lotus, the honey-sweet fruit, lost all desire to send a message back, much less return. Their only wish to linger there with the lotus eaters, grazing on lotus. All memory of the journey home dissolved forever. We've now seen back-to-back examples of Odysseus' crew veering off and nearly costing them the return home. They linger too long with the Cyclops, and they eat the lotus fruit. This reminds us of Zeus's words back in book 1, when he said they themselves with their own reckless ways compound their pains beyond their proper share. This is a theme in the Odyssey, that man compounds his miseries with recklessness. And we see it with the Cyclops and with the lotus fruit, and we'll see it again later with the cattle of the sun. But the most searing example of this recklessness is Odysseus' encounter with the Cyclops Polyphemus. When Odysseus and his men reach the land of the Cyclops, they beach the ship on an island just across a small waterway, which is teeming with wild goats for the men to hunt and eat, and rolling plowlands of wheat. It's a completely untouched, perfect island, a perfect place for the rest that they desperately need. And this fertile island stands in contrast to the land of the Cyclops, which is just across the harbor. Odysseus describes these Cyclopes as lawless brutes who trust so to the everlasting gods they never plant with their own hands or plow the soil. Unsown, unplowed, the earth teems with all they need: wheat, barley, and vines, swelled by the rains of Zeus to yield a big, full-bodied wine from clustered grapes. They have no meeting place for council, no laws either. No, up on the mountain peaks they live in arching caverns, each a law to himself, ruling his wives and children. Not a care in the world for any neighbor. This passage is one of the examples of how point of view can change a meaning. In context within the first person apologoi, Odysseus is giving us this description before he's been to the land of the Cyclopes. But in the context of the Odyssey, he's telling this story to the Phaeacians after he's been there. And as we're about to see, he didn't have a good time there. So we don't know if he was aware of this reputation of the Cyclopes before he ventured over there, or if his experience there is influencing the way he later describes it. This is the suspense of an unreliable narrator. In the setup from Odysseus, he's giving us the stakes. The Cyclopes don't have an organized system of agriculture. This is a sign that they're primitive, but they don't need it because they're favored by Zeus, and he provides them with all they need. This shows that they're favored by the gods. And there's no system of laws among them. They live in anarchy, with each Cyclops ruling his own house. Odysseus is sitting on this perfect island across the harbor, feasting on goats with his men, and he's looking across the water at the smoke of the Cyclopes fires, and he can even hear their thundering voices, and he decides to go have a look. He takes a few men across the water, and they climb up to a cave, and at this point, it's absolutely clear that a giant lives there. Odysseus describes the cave as a dwelling fit for a man-mountain. This mountain man is the Cyclops Polyphemus. He's the largest of the Cyclopes, and he reveals to Odysseus that he's the son of the sea god Poseidon. And what does Odysseus do when he meets the Cyclops face to face? He asks for a gift. He asks for this under the hospitality code of Xenia, because Odysseus has come into the Cyclops' home. And Odysseus reminds Polyphemus that Zeus is the defender of the code of Xenia. But the Cyclops, Polyphemus, is having none of it. He tells Odysseus, "Stranger, you must be a fool, stranger, or come from nowhere, telling me to fear the gods or avoid their wrath. We Cyclops never blink at Zeus and Zeus's shield of storm and thunder, or any other blessed god. We've got more force by far." So Odysseus isn't getting a gift, and the Cyclops is claiming he's stronger than Zeus. And Polyphemus snatches up two of Odysseus's men and smashes them on the ground and eats them. Odysseus is trapped here because there's a gigantic stone that the Cyclops swings back and forth like a door to the cave. And Odysseus and all of his men together wouldn't be strong enough to move it. He needs Polyphemus to open the door. Odysseus hatches a plan. He gets Polyphemus very drunk. And as Polyphemus is drinking, he asks Odysseus for his name. And Odysseus tells him his name is Nobody. Polyphemus passes out, and Odysseus and his men sharpen the Cyclops' giant club into a spear, and they poke his eye out while he sleeps. Polyphemus lurches awake, screaming in agony and fumbling around in the darkness, and he throws open the stone front door of his cave and calls out to his Cyclops neighbors for help. The Cyclopes come rushing over. It's the middle of the night. And when they ask Polyphemus who's trying to hurt him, he tells them it was nobody. And the neighbors leave him and go back to bed. There's 3 layers to the pun here. The first is obvious, even in translation. Odysseus says his name is Nobody, so we get the satisfaction of Polyphemus saying nobody was trying to hurt him. The second layer comes through in the Greek. Odysseus gives his name as Outis, literally meaning not anybody. So in the Greek, Polyphemus tells his friends Outis, or nobody, is hurting him. But when the neighbors repeat it back to him, they grammatically have to change it to metis, which is phonetically metis, the word for cunning that's so frequently used as an epithet for Odysseus in this poem. Odysseus gets the unbelievable satisfaction of getting the Cyclops to say nobody stabbed him, and then for his neighbors to say cunning stabbed him. Daniel Mendelsohn suggests there's a third layer to this too, that Outis actually doesn't sound that far off from some of the case forms of Odysseus's own name. If you were really drunk and you tried to say Odysseus, you might say something in Greek like Outis. And of course, that's exactly what Polyphemus is. He's very drunk. When Odysseus and his remaining men get back to their ship, Odysseus keeps shouting taunts back at Polyphemus. Odysseus is so charged up on his trickery that he can't help but gloat. Odysseus says that Zeus has paid the Cyclops back for eating guests in his own house. And Polyphemus is so angry, he's been blinded and insulted, and he rips a massive boulder off the mountain and hurls it at Odysseus and his men. And the tidal wave it causes nearly sinks their ship. And Odysseus starts to taunt Polyphemus again, and his crew beg him to stop, but he can't help himself. So they begged, but they could not bring my fighting spirit round. I called back with another burst of anger. Cyclops, if any man on the face of the earth should ask you who blinded you, shamed you so, say Odysseus, raider of cities, he gouged out your eye. Laertes' son, who makes his home in Ithaca. This brag from Odysseus, when he shouts his real name to Polyphemus, makes his life a living hell for the next 9 years, because Polyphemus calls up to his father, the sea god Poseidon, and Poseidon wrecks Odysseus time and time again. I think this episode reveals a lot about the character of Odysseus. I find him really annoying in this chapter and childish. He's lucky enough to land on this fertile island with his men. He crosses the harbor to investigate the natives for no reason. He enters the home of the giant Polyphemus and demands a gift, and invokes Zeus's name to justify this gift. And then when he's lucky enough to get away, he can't help but taunt the Cyclops. And I want to remind us again that we're dealing with an unreliable narrator here. Remember earlier, when Odysseus sat on the island of Plenty and looked across the harbor at the land of the Cyclopes, and he warned that these were lawless brutes who trusted the gods' favor, who kept no order, and who didn't regard their neighbor. Each one of those statements proved to be false. Polyphemus told Odysseus he was superior to Zeus. He does not put his faith in the gods. Polyphemus tended to his tasks inside his cave and kept an orderly house. And when Polyphemus called for help in the middle of the night after he was blinded, his neighbors came. I think Odysseus is manipulating us, and he's manipulating the Phaeacians who are listening to him in this first-person account. By painting the Cyclopes as these uncivilized brutes, he can justify his incursion onto their land, and can cast Polyphemus as an enemy for violating Xenia. But when we see through the way that Odysseus mischaracterizes the Cyclopes, they're their own people with their own customs and their own code of conduct. And it's really Odysseus who's the reckless, dangerous man. This conflict between Odysseus and Polyphemus, and the way that Odysseus casts his own morality as superior to that of Polyphemus, may be the first time that this question has been posited in the ancient literature. Is there such thing as an objective morality, or is morality subjective? In Book 10, Odysseus and his men arrive at the home of Aeolus, who's a mortal king and has been granted power by Zeus to control the winds. Aeolus hosts Odysseus for a month and sends him on his way with a bag that contains the winds. With this bag, Odysseus can unleash the right wind at the right time to speed him home to Ithaca. But when Odysseus is asleep on the ship, his men think the bag might contain a secret treasure. So they open it, and the winds escape, and they get tossed around and land back at Aeolus's island. Odysseus goes back to ask him for help again, and Aeolus can't believe that he's back. He realizes Odysseus is cursed by a powerful god, and he kicks him out of the palace. With no wind, Odysseus and his men row for 6 days and 6 nights, and they reach the land of the Laestrygonians. Odysseus describes it as a place where the nightfall and the sunrise march so close together. So the distance between nightfall and sunrise is short. He's describing a place with long days and short nights. So this must be summertime, and he must be very far north. And this fits the Greek conception of barbarians in the north, because the people in this place are giant cannibals. They eat some of Odysseus's men, and they hurl rocks at Odysseus when he flees. Odysseus lands next on the island of Aea, and the men are terrified to leave the ship. After the Cicones and the Lotus Eaters and the cannibal Cyclops and the cannibal Laestrygonians, they can't even imagine what savagery awaits them here. They split into 2 groups, and one of the groups discovers the house of the sorceress Circe. And they were right to be afraid, because she turns them into pigs. Odysseus was in the other group. He wants to save his men. So the god Hermes gives him an antidote to resist Circe's poison. When Circe gives Odysseus the potion and it doesn't affect him, she can't believe it, and it attracts her to him. Never has any other man withstood my potion. Never. Once it's past his lips and he has drunk it down. You have a mind in you no magic can enchant. You must be Odysseus, man of twists and turns. Come, sheathe your sword. Let's go to bed together. Mount my bed and mix in the magic work of love. We'll breed deep trust between us. She turns his crew of swine back into men, and they feast together. Odysseus stays on Aea for a year, feasting and bedding with Circe. And it's his men who shake him out of this trance. And there we sat, at ease, day in, day out, till a year had run its course, feasting on sides of meat and draughts of heady wine. But then, my loyal comrades took me aside and prodded. Captain, this is madness. High time you thought of your own home at last. If it really is your fate to make it back alive and reach your well-built house and native land. Odysseus goes to Circe to ask her to help him to get home, and she tells him that he must go on another journey, down to the underworld, the house of death, to seek the guidance of the famous Theban prophet Tiresias. So Odysseus sets sail for Hades. The descent of Odysseus into the underworld in Book 11 is a trope that we see everywhere in literature. There are examples of this in the Sumerian texts that predate the Homeric poems. We see it with other Greek heroes like Heracles, and it's picked up in basically all the other epic poems after Homer. Aeneas descends in the Aeneid, the entire poem of Dante's Inferno is his descent into the underworld, and so on. There are two literary names to describe these descents. A catabasis is a descent into the underworld and applies in some way to all of these literary examples. And an akia applies here because it's a consultation with the dead. The Greeks have a whole system of beliefs about the underworld, and it's an enormous physical place lorded over by Zeus's brother Hades and his wife, the goddess Persephone. When a person dies on Earth, their corpse is put through the proper burial rites to give the soul passage to the underworld. These souls wander the underworld as shades, which aren't fully conscious. They only regain full consciousness when they taste blood from a sacrifice. Circe sends Odysseus to consult with one man specifically in the underworld, named Tiresias. She tells him that this man, Tiresias, can tell Odysseus how to get home. Tiresias is a blind prophet from Thebes who was gifted with divine sight in life. This is a trope that we see over and over again, that the prophets were physically blind because it heightened their other senses. There's a parallel here with the bards. The bard Demodocus in Phaeacia is described in the Odyssey as being blind. And ancient people themselves thought Homer was blind. There's a parallel here that the ancients thought these blind bards could see past stories in a special way. Tiresias is famous in the myths as the prophet that predicted that Oedipus was the killer of his father and the lover of his mother. And when Tiresias arrives in the underworld, Persephone blesses him with a special consciousness. The rest of the shades only regain consciousness when they drink blood, but Tiresias remains conscious all the time. So Odysseus gets to the underworld and he offers a sacrifice, and the souls emerge. Dark blood flowed into the trench, and up out of Erebus they came. Flocking toward me now, the ghosts of the dead and gone. Brides and unwed youths, and old men who had suffered much. And girls with their tender hearts freshly scarred by sorrow, and great armies of battle dead, stabbed by bronze spears. Men of war still wrapped in bloody armor. Thousands swarming around the trench from every side. Unearthly cries. Blanching terror gripped me. I love this description of the different types of people he sees emerging in the underworld. We can imagine the range of human experience that was lived before these souls were equalized in death. And we get this horrifying image here of these thousands of brides and kids and warriors lurching towards Odysseus to taste the blood of the sacrifice and regain consciousness. Odysseus meets a lot of interesting people in the underworld. Maybe none more surprising to him than his mother, who he didn't know was dead. When his mother consumes the blood, she comes to consciousness and instantly recognizes her son. And Odysseus takes the opportunity to ask how everyone's doing back in Ithaca, and how his mother died. She tells him Telemachus and Penelope and his father Laertes are all still alive, but they're consumed with grief for him. And she tells Odysseus that this grief is what killed her. It gives more stakes to his journey home. At any moment, his loved ones could give in to the grief. Odysseus tries to hug his mother, but she slips through his fingers. 3 times I rushed toward her, desperate to hold her. 3 times she fluttered through my fingers, sifting away like a shadow, dissolving like a dream. And each time the grief cut to the heart, sharper, yes. And I cried out to her, words winging into the darkness. Mother, why not wait for me? How I long to hold you. So even here, in the house of death, we can fling our loving arms around each other, take some joy in the tears that numb the heart. After his mother, Odysseus meets a procession of women. And these passages are packed with primary source mythology. Odysseus meets Oedipus's mother, Jocasta, and we get the earliest surviving telling of the core myth of Oedipus Rex. There's also the earliest surviving telling of the alternating days of Castor and Pollux, told by their mother, Leda. Almost all of these interactions give us examples of relationships between men and women, and almost all of them ended in tragedy. I think this procession of women is intentional by Homer, because it reinforces the specialness of Odysseus' relationship with his wife Penelope. They have something that so few people have, this homophrosyne, this oneness of mind. And as the literal low point of Odysseus' return home, he's in the underworld, this is his reminder to fight on to his wife. We see a focus from Odysseus after this. Gone is the man who taunted Polyphemus and wasted a year with Circe. He'll confront each test head on, and he'll resist each distraction after this, hell-bent on getting home. After the women, there's a procession of men, and each man will offer Odysseus a bit of wisdom they've learned in death. The first is Agamemnon. Odysseus is surprised to see him dead, and Agamemnon tells him about his fate at the hands of his wife Clytemnestra. He tells Odysseus to be careful when he goes home, and this is how Odysseus gets the idea to go home in secrecy. After Agamemnon, Odysseus sees Achilles. Their exchange is so simple, but if we parse the language closely, I think Achilles gives Odysseus 3 profound philosophical lessons. The ghost of the splendid runner knew me at once, and hailed me with a flight of mournful questions. Royal son of Laertes, Odysseus, man of tactics, reckless friend, what next? What greater feat can that cunning head contrive? What daring brought you down to the house of death, where the senseless, burnt-out wraiths of mortals make their home? This first dialogue from Achilles is so true to the character that we saw in the Iliad. We saw this curious and charismatic tone of voice from him in the funeral games for Patroclus in Book 23. Achilles spends so much time raging and grieving in the Iliad, but in these bits of dialogue we see the charming king he could have been had he sailed home to Thea. The epithets in Homer are often arranged based off how they fit the dactylic hexameter of the meter. So I'm going to read further into this than I should, and just point out that in translation, there's such a beautiful summation of Odysseus' life and how his friend Achilles greets him. All men are born first from their parents. First, he was the royal son of Laertes. Then, he was named Odysseus. He earned his reputation as a man of tactics at Troy. And we've seen his recklessness in the Odyssey, inciting the rage of Polyphemus and his father, Poseidon. What's next? That is why Odysseus is here in the underworld. Achilles is preempting the question he's about to ask, and he's preempting it in a string of epithets. The things that we do tell us who we are. What Odysseus does next will evolve his identity once again. He's here to see Tiresias, and Tiresias tells Odysseus to pay those suitors back in blood. It's fitting that Achilles is the one to preempt this, to ask his friend who he'll be next. Because when Odysseus exacts his revenge on the suitors, he'll most closely resemble Achilles himself. He'll give in to the rage, and as he lays waste to these men, he'll even echo specific dialogue that Achilles spoke in his rampage in the Iliad. Odysseus tells his friend Achilles that his fame is unrivaled, and he notices the dead around Achilles who look up to him as their leader in the underworld. But you, Achilles, there's not a man in the world more blessed than you. There never has been, never will be one. Time was when you were alive, we Argives honored you as a god. And now down here, I see, you lord it over the dead in all your power. So grieve no more at dying, great Achilles. And Achilles responds with another piece of wisdom for his friend. No witting words about death to me, shining Odysseus. By God, I'd rather slave on earth for another man, some dirt-poor tenant farmer who scrapes to keep alive, than rule down here over all the breathless dead. Achilles is telling his friend there's no gradation of being dead that can challenge even the lowest existence of being alive. Achilles says he'd rather be a slave on earth than a king in the underworld. It's easy to misread this speech from Achilles as a repudiation of his choice in the Iliad to avenge his friend Patroclus. When his friend Patroclus died, Achilles weighed his two fates. He could go on to Troy and slay Hector and know that his own death would soon follow. Or he could sail home to Thea and live a long life. From Achilles' point of view, he chose to slay Hector and to bring on his own death. And you can read this passage in the Odyssey as Achilles regretting that choice. He'd rather be a slave on earth than a king in the underworld. I read it differently. I think Achilles' core philosophy in the Iliad is that there's just life and death. He looks at his friends like Odysseus, who chase honor in the Iliad, and he thinks they're misguided. And he looks at his other friends, like Nestor, who try to motivate Achilles with a Greek sense of duty. And he doesn't quite get that either. Achilles tells us this directly in the Iliad. No, what lasting thanks in the long run for warring with our enemies, on, no end. One and the same lot for the man who hangs back and the man who battles hard. The same honor waits for the coward and the brave. They both go down to death. Achilles sees the role that fate plays in the world, and he sees these great men motivated by duty and motivated by personal honor. And he sees how these layered constraints blot out whatever freedom you had. For Achilles, his fate is constricting enough. There's just fate, life, and death. And so long as he's alive, he'll choose to embrace his fate over and over again. So it's no surprise to me that when Odysseus visits Achilles in the underworld, and compliments the honor he has lording over these shades in Hades, Achilles would be very quick to reject that. Not because he regrets embracing his fate in the Iliad, but because he values life more than anything. The last bit of wisdom that we get from Achilles is in his relationship with his father and son. Achilles speaks of his father Peleus, who's an old man about the same age as Odysseus' father Laertes. Oh, to arrive at father's house, the man I was, for one brief day, I'd make my fury and my hands invincible hands, a thing of terror to all those men who abuse the king with force and wrest away his honor. Achilles is fantasizing the violence with which he'd destroy his father's enemies. If only Achilles could have returned home. Odysseus has just learned moments ago from the prophet Tiresias about the suitors in his own house, courting his wife and laying waste to his family's honor. Homer doesn't give us this explicitly, but I think Achilles is giving his friend Odysseus imagery of rage and revenge, and a pathway to restore his own honor when he goes home. The end of their exchange is Achilles asking about his son Neoptolemus, and Odysseus recounts to Achilles in great detail the skill and honor with which Neoptolemus fought in Troy. And after Achilles hears this, he skips off in joy. Just like how I suspect it's powerful for Odysseus to hear Achilles fantasize about the rage with which he would lay waste to his father's enemies, I think it's similarly powerful for Odysseus to see the happiness that overtakes Achilles when he hears of his son's glory. The last book of the Odyssey is going to pay off this interaction with Achilles in a big way. We'll get to see this incredible team-up of Odysseus, his father Laertes, and his son Telemachus, all fighting together to defeat their enemies. And from this interaction between Achilles and Odysseus, I have to imagine that this is the glorious ending Achilles would want for his friend. Before Odysseus is overrun by the shades, he leaves the underworld. He has what he came there for. The prophet Tiresias confirms that Poseidon still rages at Odysseus for blinding his son Polyphemus. He tells Odysseus that he can still make it home. When he lands on Thrinacia Island, he and his crew must not harm the cattle of the sun. If they harm the sun god's cattle, his crew is doomed, and Odysseus' journey will be full of pain. Once Odysseus returns home and exacts revenge on his suitors, Another journey awaits. He'll only appease Poseidon after he's traveled so far inland that the people have never tasted the salt of the sea or heard of Poseidon. There, he'll offer a sacrifice to Poseidon. Then he will be free to return home for good, and he'll live to a long age and die a painless death. In Book 12, we get the second half of Odysseus' journey in the Apologoi. He goes back to Circe's island to bury a fallen crew member. Then, his men pass by the islands of the Sirens, these supernatural beings, part woman and part bird, and they lure men to destruction with their irresistible songs. If you hear the song of a siren, you'll do anything to go to them and waste your days listening to their songs forever. Odysseus stops the ears of his men with softened beeswax so they can't hear the song. He alone will listen to it. He tells them to lash him up to the mast of the ship and not to let him loose no matter what he says. So what is their song, and why does Odysseus want to hear it so badly? Come closer, famous Odysseus, Achaea's pride and glory. Moor your ship on our coast so you can hear our song. Never has any sailor passed our shores in his black craft until he has heard the honeyed voices pouring from our lips. And once he hears to his heart's content, sails on a wiser man. We know all the pains that the Greeks and Trojans once endured on the spreading plain of Troy when the gods willed it so. All that comes to pass on the fertile earth, we know it all. The song of the Sirens is understanding. Homer's telling us that being understood is the sweetest song imaginable. The Sirens tell Odysseus that they know all the pains that the Greeks and Trojans once endured on the spreading plain of Troy. If Odysseus goes to their island, he'll spend his days in this shared remembrance of the past. This is the power of the Sirens. They know all that comes to pass on the earth. They have an understanding of the past of each man who sails by their island. We've seen this theme elsewhere in the poem, this idea that the greatest joy comes from shared remembrance of the past. When Telemachus visits Menelaus in Sparta, Menelaus says if only Odysseus could have sailed home with him, he'd give him a house and land, and they'd spend their days remembering their time at Troy. When the Phaeacian bard Demodocus sings about the Trojan horse in Book 8, Odysseus is reduced to tears remembering the past, and he praises the singing as the crown of life. Men crave to be understood in the Odyssey, and there's a cheap way to do this, by hearing songs and swapping stories of the past. But we've also seen this idea of Homophrosyne, this oneness of mind that makes Odysseus' relationship with Penelope so unique. In fact, Odysseus called this Homophrosyne the greatest gift in the world. He also says that hearing the bard sing songs of the past is the crown of life. He's praising these two things similarly because the same feeling gives them their power, understanding. The fact that Odysseus keeps moving forward, though, shows us that Homer preferences one form of understanding over another. In this relationship between Odysseus and Penelope, Homer's showing us the right type of understanding to give us lasting happiness. It's not two old war dogs wasting their days away in Sparta reminiscing about Troy. It's not addiction to the songs of a bard in Phaeacia. And it's not the superficiality of these sirens singing what you want to hear. All of these forms of understanding are rooted in the past. The only understanding that we see in this poem that propels a character forward is this Homophrosyne, this oneness of mind. It's the promise of future understanding that has nothing to do with the past. Homophrosyne is the better good because it's rooted in the people themselves and not in their shared past. So why does Odysseus strap himself to the mast? Why does he torture himself hearing the song of the Sirens? There's an unflattering reading of this that he's still that guy who just can't help his curiosity. He's still the guy who couldn't help but explore the island of the Cyclops. And he just can't help but experience the song of the Sirens. I actually think there's a practical reason for this that's more compelling. If the crew all stop their ears, how will they know when the singing is stopped? I realize it sounds a bit silly, but we have a strong theme in the poem of the recklessness of man causing additional pain. These were the first words that Zeus spoke back in Book 1. And we've seen over and over how recklessness causes additional pain. Odysseus ventures to the land of the Cyclops for no reason and causes himself additional pain. Odysseus sleeps on the boat, and the crew opens the bag of winds from Aeolus, and that causes them additional pain. Odysseus needs to make sure the recklessness of him and his crew don't cause them additional pain. If he lashes himself to the mast, his crew will know exactly when the singing starts and stops. And more importantly, they'll see the madness the singing causes, so they won't be tempted to experience it themselves. They sail past the Sirens, and they survive the monsters of Scylla and Charybdis. And they come to a green island and see the cattle of the sun. This was the key in the prophecy from Tiresias, not to eat the cattle of the sun. They're trapped on this island for a month as they get pelted with storms. And they run out of rations on the boat. And while Odysseus is inland praying to the gods, his men slaughter the cattle. Odysseus is walking back to the ship, and he smells the smoky savor of roasts. He knows they're doomed. As we expect, the sun god Helios is furious. And I love his protestation to Zeus. "Father Zeus, the rest of you blissful gods who never die, punish them all, that crew of Laertes' son, Odysseus. What an outrage. They killed my cattle, the great joy of my heart. Day in, day out, when I climbed the starry skies, and when I wheeled back down from the heights to touch the earth once more. Unless they pay me back in blood for the butchery of my herds, down I go to the house of death and blaze among the dead." I love this idea of the sun personified in Helios, and his protest that he'll shut the lights off on the earth and go down to Hades to blaze among the dead. Zeus is so unaffected in his response to Helios. "Sun, you keep on shining among the deathless gods and mortal men across the good green earth. And as for the guilty ones, why, soon enough on the wine-dark sea, I'll hit the racing ship with a white-hot bolt. I'll tear it into splinters." We hear in this tone of voice that this is an easy decision for Zeus. I think there are 3 layers to this. The honor of an important god is on the line here. And as we saw many times in the Iliad and the Odyssey, the gods won't fight each other over mortals. Just like Zeus and Athena won't directly challenge Poseidon after Odysseus insults his son. Zeus also won't challenge the sun god after Odysseus' men slay his cattle. The second layer is prophecy. Tiresias is a skilled prophet, and he foretells this exactly to Odysseus in the Catabasis in Book 11. "Do not slay the sun god's cattle, or your men will be destroyed and your journey home will be delayed." Each prophecy in the Homeric poems is fulfilled. Zeus is justified to strike down Odysseus' ship because this is prophesied. And we know from the Theogony that prophecy predates and even supersedes Zeus. So Zeus has no choice but to uphold it. The final layer is just that Zeus doesn't care about Odysseus. He balances the honor of the gods and he honors prophecy in the Iliad, just as he does in the Odyssey. But we see so much more emotion from Zeus in the Iliad. When Zeus's demigod son Sarpedon dies at the hands of Patroclus, Zeus is devastated, and he expresses feelings for Hector and Achilles both. He won't change their fate, they're still doomed, but he shows that he cares. We don't see that emotion from him about the fate of Odysseus, and we certainly don't see it towards Odysseus' men. Zeus gave us his judgment with his first words of the poem. Man compounds his misery with his recklessness. And Odysseus' crew was reckless when they ate the cattle of the sun god. 6 days the men feast on the island, and there's nothing Odysseus can do at this point. The cattle are dead. They board the ship, Zeus strikes it down, the men die, and Odysseus floats at sea, clinging to timber from the ship. He narrowly avoids the monster Charybdis once more, and after 9 days and 9 nights, he lands in Ogygia, where he's imprisoned by Calypso for 7 years. This completes the journey of Odysseus and his apologoi, the first-person story within the story that he told from books 9 through 12. It's the exact halfway point in the 24-book Odyssey, and it gives us a clean break in the story. The first 12 books of the Odyssey are the winding journey home. The last 12 books of the Odyssey are about what Odysseus does when he gets home. He has to reassert himself as a father, a husband, and a king. With his journey complete, we can look back on each stage in his 10-year trip. And I think there's another theme here. What keeps him from coming home for so long? In some cases, it's the will of the gods. Calypso herself chose to hold him captive. In some cases, it's the recklessness of man. He didn't have to provoke Polyphemus. and his men were warned not to kill the cattle of the sun god. In other cases, though, it's just distraction. The lotus fruit lulled his men into complacency. He wasted a year betting and feasting with the sorceress Circe. He was tempted by the Sirens. He resisted Calypso's paradise and her offer to make him immortal. And in the last episode in Phaeacia, he rejects the marriage offer from the kindest people he's met on his journey in this utopic society to the girl Nausicaa, who represents pure goodness. Odysseus' will delivers him home, not just against the supernatural evils we hear so much about, but against the offers to dwell in the past and to find companionship with someone new. This is the end of his Nostos. He's home. In Book 13, Odysseus finally makes it home to Ithaca, and Poseidon is upset. He can't believe the Phaeacians helped Odysseus to get home. Zeus coddles his brother. "Incredible," Zeus, who marshals the thunderheads, replied. "Earthshaker, you with your massive power. Why moaning so? The gods don't disrespect you. What a stir there'd be if they flung abuse at the oldest, noblest of them all. Those mortals, if any man so lost in his strength and prowess, pays you no respect, just pay him back. The power is always yours. Do what you like, whatever warms your heart." Just like we saw earlier, there are 3 layers to Zeus's speech. A very powerful god is insulted, and Zeus must give him his honor. The honor of the gods will always supersede the honor of men. There's a prophecy that Alcinous, the Phaeacian king, recalls, that they would grant safe passage to a man, and their harbor would one day be blocked in retribution. As we saw earlier, the prophecies are always honored in Homer. And even though Zeus is bound by honor to the gods and he's bound by prophecy, he still just doesn't care that much about the Phaeacian people. He's completely emotionally unaffected. In fact, he spurs Poseidon to go even further. Poseidon tells Zeus he'll destroy the Phaeacian ship that transported Odysseus, and he'll raise a mountain to block the Phaeacian port. This is already devastating enough. Blocking a port is an economic death sentence in a maritime region like Mycenae in Greece. And it's particularly devastating for the Phaeacians, who pride themselves on their capabilities at sea. But Zeus goes even further. He tells his brother Poseidon to wait for all the people of Phaeacia, to watch the ship speeding home, and when they're all looking, to turn the ship into a rock in the sea. Zeus's tone here, egging his brother on to make an even bigger show out of his punishment for the Phaeacians, completely undermines his role as Xenios, the godly protector of Xenia, the Greek hospitality code. The Phaeacians have been the ultimate hosts, and there's nobody in the poem more deserving of Xenios' protection. But the honor of Poseidon and the finality of the prophecy take precedence. I'm reminded here of the challenge from Athena in Book 5. She asks her father Zeus if Odysseus, the kindest of kings, should suffer such terrible punishment. What reason is there for any king to be good? We could say the same thing about the Phaeacians here. Why would any city-state practice Xenia if they hear of the Phaeacian ship being obliterated by Poseidon and him raising a mountain to block their port? When Odysseus finally makes landfall, he cannot believe that he's home. The example of Clytemnestra's murder of Agamemnon still hangs over the poem, and Athena warns Odysseus again of the dangerous suitors. She disguises Odysseus as a beggar, and this begins his slow re-entry to the palace. In Book 14, Athena speeds off to Sparta to bring Telemachus home and to keep him safe from the suitors on the ship, who are still hiding in the cove to ambush him. Odysseus climbs up to the humble house of Eumaeus, his swineherd. Eumaeus was a loyal servant of Odysseus, and his interaction with Eumaeus shows us the ways Odysseus is going to test people as he returns. He needs to see who's still loyal to him. Odysseus presents himself to Eumaeus as a beggar to see how Eumaeus receives him. Odysseus asks him about his master to see if Eumaeus will speak positively about Odysseus. And when Eumaeus asks the beggar Odysseus where he came from, he makes up some crazy fake story about who he is, and in this fake story, he says he knows Odysseus, and that Odysseus is alive and coming home soon, maybe out in the open, maybe in disguise, and he's bringing a lot of treasure with him, and he listens for their reaction. And then finally, he asks them for a sign of generosity. In the case of Eumaeus, He says he's cold and asks for a cloak, and Eumaeus gives him his own winter cloak. We see this sequence of tests most clearly with the swineherd Eumaeus, but we also see it with the cowherd Phaeacians, and with the suitors themselves when Odysseus presents himself to them in the palace halls. In Book 15, Athena brings Telemachus home. When he's departing Sparta, Telemachus is leaving in a bit of a hurry, and Menelaus sends him off with gifts. And Menelaus gives a speech saying it's okay that Telemachus is hurrying home. "I'd never detain you here too long, Telemachus, not if your heart is set on going home. I'd find fault with another host, I'm sure, too warm to his guests, too pressing or too cold. Balance is best in all things. It's bad either way, spurring the stranger home who wants to linger, holding the one who longs to leave. You know, welcome the coming, speed the parting guest." This line appears in subquotes. Welcome the coming, speed the parting guest. Phaeacians puts this in subquotes because he's borrowing this line from Alexander Pope's translation of the Odyssey in the 1700s. This line in the Pope translation became a proverb in English, so Phaeacians pays homage to it here. The rhyming couplet from Pope is "True friendship's laws are by this rule expressed. Welcome the coming, speed the parting guest." As Telemachus is boarding a ship in Pylos to sail home to Ithaca, a fugitive approaches him and begs for safe passage out of Pylos. This fugitive is the seer Theoclymenus, and he's just killed a man as part of a long-running blood feud. Without hesitation, Telemachus takes him aboard, and with just this simple interaction, Homer's doing so much literarily. First, he's raising the stakes. We know the suitors are plotting Telemachus' death, and we know they've hid a ship of men in a cove in Ithaca waiting to strike Telemachus when he approaches the shore. What if the fugitive, Theoclymenus, is conspiring with the suitors? What if he's just a bad guy? He's on the run for killing somebody. So his introduction to Telemachus raises the tension. Second, Telemachus is showing xenia by accepting the fugitive, Theoclymenus. This is building honor for Telemachus as part of his journey. And there's a special layer to this, which is the special xenia that you show to a man who's fled his homeland in exile. The Greeks believed that a blood killing creates miasma, a spiritual contagion. You can only cleanse the miasma by undergoing a purification rite with a neighboring king. That purification rite is called catharsis. Telemachus isn't a king, so he can't ritually purify Theoclymenus. But I still think the specificity of Telemachus accepting a man who's in exile is building Telemachus' own kingly honor. The last layer is our exposure to the generational pain that a blood feud causes. These great families would go generation after generation killing each other to avenge the deaths of ancestors they had never even met. We're about to see the reunion between Telemachus and Odysseus, and they'll quickly get into planning the revenge on the suitors. But there's one part of the plan that Odysseus cannot solve. When he destroys the suitors, he'll be extinguishing the male heirs of 108 aristocratic families. Their families will seek revenge, and Odysseus knows he can't possibly fight all of them off. This is his wisdom, thinking ahead to what comes after he exacts his revenge. Odysseus struggles with this problem until Book 20, the night before his revenge, and he can't sleep. Part of it is his anger boiling over at the suitors. Part of it is his nerves. But a lot of it is that he doesn't have a solution for how to stop the blood feud. Athena comes to him. She's almost offended that he's so worried about this. "Impossible, man. Others are quick to trust a weaker comrade, some poor mortal far less cunning than I. But I am a goddess. Look, the very one who guards you in all your trials to the last." Odysseus will lay waste to the suitors. The families of the suitors will come for him. And in Book 24, Athena gets a peace decree from her father Zeus and rushes to the battlefield to command the men to drop their weapons and stop the violence. We see the generational effects of a blood feud through Theoclymenus, and Zeus and Athena prevent that fate for Odysseus and his family. The suitors commit crimes in Odysseus' home, so the gods let Odysseus take revenge. But they stop the cycle of violence here. The Odyssey ends with the gods allowing one act of vengeance only. In the Oresteia, we'll see Aegisthus and Clytemnestra murder Agamemnon when he returns home. And we'll see Agamemnon's son, Orestes, exact his revenge on his mother and her lover. In the last play of that trilogy, the Eumenides, Orestes is put on trial for the killing of his mother. One side argues that the killing is a blood crime and he must be punished. The other side argues that this vengeance is justified. The jurors are deadlocked, and Athena is the one to cast the deciding vote. She acquits Orestes, saying he was justified for seeking vengeance. It's the same paradigm she applies here in the Odyssey. One act of aggression, one act of vengeance. In the Odyssey, she gets this peace decree from Zeus. But in the Oresteia, this case is argued in a courtroom in front of human jurors. That's the advancement of jurisprudence from the Odyssey in 700 BC to the Oresteia in 458 BC. 5th century Athens takes justice away from the whims of the gods and the Furies who spur these blood feuds, and puts it in the hands of institutions. At least that's the conventional reading of the Oresteia. But I'll have a lot to say about this conventional reading in next month's video. In Book 16, Telemachus returns to Ithaca, and with Athena's help, he returns using a different route to avoid the trap laid by the suitors waiting in the cove to ambush him. He comes first to the swineherd Eumaeus' house, where he's introduced to his father Odysseus, still disguised as a beggar. Telemachus tells Eumaeus to go to the palace and tell Penelope in secret that her son Telemachus has returned. He wants to keep this quiet because he knows the suitors are still scheming to kill him. When Eumaeus leaves, Odysseus gets a sign from Athena that now's the time to reveal his true identity to his son. And Athena approaches the cabin visible only to Odysseus. Just at the shelter's door, she stopped, visible to Odysseus. But Telemachus could not see her, sense her there. The gods don't show themselves to every man alive. Odysseus saw her, so did the dogs. No barking now, they whimpered, cringing away in terror through the yard. She gave a sign with her brows. Odysseus caught it. Athena urged him on. Royal son of Laertes, Odysseus, old campaigner. Now is the time. Now tell your son the truth. Hold nothing back, so the two of you can plot the suitor's doom and then set out for town. I myself won't lag behind you long. I'm blazing for a battle. She changes Odysseus' appearance, and when Telemachus sees the beggar transformed into Odysseus, he thinks that he's a shape-shifting god. But Odysseus tells him, "No, I am not a god. Why confuse me with one who never dies? No, I am your father, the Odysseus you wept for all your days. You bore a world of pain, the cruel abuse of men." They embrace, and very quickly they start to scheme destruction for the suitors. Telemachus gives Odysseus an accounting of where the suitors come from, and he tells Odysseus that these are strong men, and there are so many of them. He asks Odysseus if there are other allies they can summon to help them, a brave friend perhaps, and Odysseus answers him, "Let me tell you, bear it in mind now. Listen to me closely. Think, will Athena, flanked by Father Zeus, do for the two of us? Or shall I rack my brains for another champion?" Odysseus tells his son, "I've got two friends, Zeus and Athena." He knows Athena's itching for a fight, but Odysseus has to wait for the right moment. He's going to travel to the palace in secrecy as a beggar to get into the room. Then Odysseus will signal to Telemachus, and that will be his hint to hide all the weapons from the room, so that when Odysseus strikes, the suitors won't be able to defend themselves. In Book 17, Telemachus enters the halls first, and he walks in with a different swagger and a different level of honor than what he had when he left. Athena's mission was a success. He was praised for his speech by the great King Nestor, and he was recognized as Odysseus' son by the beautiful Helen, and he received gifts from the king Menelaus, and showed hospitality to the exiled man, Theoclymenus. Each episode built his honor, and he strides into the palace hall as a deserving prince, and with the secret knowledge that his father has arrived in Ithaca. Spear in hand, Telemachus strode on through the hall and out, and a pair of sleek hounds went trotting at his heels. And Athena lavished a marvelous splendor on the prince, so the people all gazed in wonder as he came forward. The swaggering suitors clustered, milling round him, welcome words on their lips and murder in their hearts. Disguised as the beggar, Odysseus follows after Telemachus, and when Odysseus approaches the palace doors, he encounters my favorite character in the poem, his dog Argos. This dog is 20 years old. Odysseus got him as a puppy just before he left for Troy, and Odysseus recognizes this dog, covered in ticks and splayed out in filth on the floor. neglected and just clinging to life. And the dog looks up at the beggar approaching the palace and recognizes that it's his old master Odysseus. A dog that lay there lifted up his muzzle, pricked his ears. The moment he sensed Odysseus standing by, he thumped his tail, nuzzling low, and his ears dropped, though he had no strength to drag himself an inch toward his master. Odysseus glanced to the side and flicked away a tear, hiding it from Eumaeus. With that, he entered the well-constructed palace, strode through the halls, and joined the proud suitors. But the dark shadow of death closed down on Argos's eyes the instant he saw Odysseus, 20 years away. The episode of the dog is obviously devastating, but beyond the melodrama of Odysseus' return home, it's giving us a clear symbol of the disarray of his house. When Odysseus destroys the suitors, he'll also brutally kill some of the disloyal servants too. The care for this dog was entrusted to these servants, and they neglected it. When Odysseus enters the palace halls disguised as a beggar, he meets the suitors face to face, and they all mistreat him. Odysseus gives a long fake story about his travels, saying he's sailed the world. The lead suitor, Antinous, calls beggar Odysseus a pest and hurls a stool, and it hits Odysseus in his back. And even the other suitors think Antinous has gone too far, and they say to each other that Antinous broke the law by harming a beggar. The cruelty to Odysseus when he's disguised as a beggar feels almost gratuitous, but I think it's purposeful. Homer doesn't give us this explicitly, but the next thing that happens is Penelope asking Eumaeus to summon the beggar. She's seen the mistreatment of the beggar, and she's heard of his travels around the world. She wants to welcome him properly, but she also wants to question him to see if he has heard anything about her husband in his travels. I think this is the payoff of the abuse Odysseus suffers at the hands of the suitors. Odysseus had to find a way to get to Penelope still in disguise, and by suffering that abuse, he knows she'll have to meet with him to rectify it. She summons him, and he says he'll wait for nightfall so they can speak in private. In Book 18, Odysseus is waiting for the sun to go down and for the feast to stop so he can meet with Penelope in private. But a different beggar, Iris, picks a fight with the beggar Odysseus, and the suitors hear them arguing, and they fix a boxing match between them. Odysseus prepares for the fight, and he adjusts the loose-fitting rags that he's wearing, and now the suitors can see his massive shoulders and the muscles in his arms and thighs. And in one hit, Odysseus knocks out Iris, and he props his unconscious body up against a wall and taunts him. Now hold your post, play the scarecrow to all the pigs and dogs. But no more lording it over strangers, no more playing the beggar king for you loathsome fool. This is the pun of the scene. Odysseus taunts Iris, calling him the beggar king. The irony being that Iris, in his swagger, thought himself superior to all other beggars, a beggar king. But Odysseus is an actual king disguised as a beggar. In Book 19, the beggar Odysseus meets with Penelope in private. She asks him who he is, and before he tells her, he praises her. No man on the face of the earth could find fault with you. Your fame, believe me, has reached the vaulting skies. Fame like a flawless king's who dreads the gods, who governs a kingdom vast, proud, and strong, who upholds justice, true, and the black earth bears wheat and barley. Trees bow down with fruit, and the sheep drop lambs and never fail. And the sea teems with fish, thanks to his decent, upright rule. And under his sovereign sway, the people flourish. The Homeric simile here is a king. King Odysseus is raising Penelope's status to his equal, a king. And not any king, but a just king. I read into this as him praising her faithfulness to him. And the reward for that justice is this series of fertility images. The earth bears wheat, the trees bear fruit, the sheep give birth to lambs, and the sea teems with fish. Odysseus is telling us here that justice is a necessary condition for flourishing. You could take an unflattering interpretation here and say it's just another lie from Odysseus. It's some throwaway greeting to his wife, whom he won't yet reveal himself to. Homer doesn't make it clear. I read this, though, as praise. He's not praising the justice with which she's ruled his household, because he's already seen the suitors have driven the place into insanity. But he can praise her faithfulness. Penelope says her life is torment without Odysseus, and they have this long back and forth with Odysseus still disguised as a beggar. They keep testing each other, and I find it so unpleasant to read. Neither of them trusts what the other is saying. Odysseus is lying through his teeth, and it all feels so unnecessary. In this back and forth, Penelope tells Odysseus about her shroud deception. And she tells the beggar Odysseus that she has to make a decision now about marriage to the suitors. They exposed her deception with the shroud, so she can't stall any longer. Her parents are pressuring her to remarry, and she can't let the suitors keep squandering her son's inheritance. At the end of this conversation with the beggar Odysseus, Penelope decides she'll end the suiting tomorrow. She'll propose a challenge and see who of the suitors is great enough to string Odysseus's bow and to shoot an arrow through the lined up holes of 12 axes. And beggar Odysseus encourages her. He says that by the time the men are partaking in the challenge, Odysseus will have returned home to her. So why does Penelope decide to issue the challenge now? We know her son isn't happy about the suitors, and yes, she's getting pressure from her parents to remarry, and yes, the suitors exposed her trickery with the shroud, but there's still no indication that she has to issue the challenge tomorrow. We can read this melodramatically, that issuing the challenge tomorrow is moving the story along. It's giving us a real sense of urgency for Odysseus to lay waste to the suitors. And it's exciting the audience that the revenge we've been waiting 20 books for is coming tomorrow. But still, I don't think it makes sense from Penelope's point of view. It feels too arbitrary. I don't think we should accept this arbitrariness because it completely undermines Penelope's character. It makes her seem weak, that after waiting 20 years, and after hearing so many times from so many different characters in just the last few days that Odysseus is returning home, she somehow gives in. Even though I want to reject this because it makes her character weak, Homer doesn't make it easy for us. Penelope says over and over again, very explicitly, that she does not believe Odysseus is coming home. But if we take a leap and say she's deciding to issue the challenge tomorrow to further her own aims, I think there are 3 explanations for why she could decide to issue the challenge tomorrow. One explanation could be that she knows the challenge is impossible. She issues the challenge so all the suitors will fail, and the suiting will come to an end. Another option is she senses the beggar Odysseus might be the real Odysseus. In the back and forth of their conversation, she senses something in his personality that reminds her of him. Maybe she devises this test of stringing Odysseus's bow to find out if this beggar is truly her husband. A final option is that she recognizes the beggar is Odysseus. She definitively knows he is Odysseus. If this is the case, then she issues the challenge of the bow to put the beggar Odysseus in an environment with all the suitors in one place, and to give him his powerful weapon back in his hands. The best supporting evidence of this is the claim from Helen that she recognized Odysseus when he snuck into the walled citadel of Troy disguised as a beggar. We also have the tease of how Homer describes their dreams of each other. There's something almost supernatural in the way they recognize each other in their dreams. And we'll come to these dreams in a moment. But the evidence against this is that we've already established in Book 4 that Helen is a liar. So who knows if she actually recognized Odysseus? There's also the simple fact that if Penelope does recognize her husband, surely there's a better way for her to help him lay waste to the suitors. She could assemble the suitors for any reason under any conditions. And the stringing of the bow isn't giving Odysseus the absolute best chance to defeat them. With how cunning Penelope is, we'd expect her to come up with a better situation than this. But still, I want to believe in this because it makes her character stronger. I want to believe that Penelope chooses to issue the challenge to further her own aims. I think the key passage comes in Book 20, after their meeting when Odysseus is still disguised as a beggar. Odysseus and Penelope go to sleep in their separate beds, and each of them is tortured by visions of what will come tomorrow. Odysseus tosses and turns, plotting destruction against the suitors. And Penelope is wallowing in her grief that she could be leaving Odysseus's palace tomorrow forever if one of the suitors succeeds in her challenge. Penelope agonizes, "May the gods who rule Olympus blot me out. Artemis, with your glossy braids, come shoot me dead, so I can plunge beneath this loathsome earth with the image of Odysseus vivid in my mind. Never let me warm the heart of a weaker man. Even my dreams torment me, sent by wicked spirits. Again, just this night, someone lay beside me, like Odysseus to the life, when he embarked with his men at arms. My heart raced with joy. No dream, I thought. The waking truth, at last. The Greeks believed that the silent arrows of Artemis can strike you with death. And Penelope, in her grief, is saying she wants to be struck down to the house of death right now with the image of Odysseus vivid in my mind. So where did she get that image? She tells us that after her meeting with Beggar Odysseus, she had a dream that someone lay beside her like Odysseus to the life. I read this that her meeting with Beggar Odysseus brought her closer than she's been in 20 years to her husband. Maybe she's perceiving his qualities, or maybe she's recognizing it was him. She says, no dream, I thought, the waking truth at last. And we cut straight from this to Odysseus hearing his wife's cry. And great Odysseus caught the sound of his wife's cry and began to daydream. Deep in his heart, it seemed, she stood beside him, knew him, now at last. I want to dwell on this stylistically. This is a match cut. We see this everywhere in cinema. When you want to show a relationship between two characters, you orient them in the same position and you cut abruptly from one character to another. And without saying it aloud, you're showing the audience that there's a relationship between these two characters. This story is told by Homer 2,600 years before the invention of cinema. But he's using his own medium here to give us a match cut with the textual image of husband and wife in bed separately, but each one thinking of the other. Homer doesn't make it clear what exactly Penelope knows or whether or not she fully realizes Odysseus' identity as the beggar. But I think it is clear from this match cut that the Homophrosyne that they had 20 years ago is alive and well. These insufferable characters who constantly lie and test each other and trust nobody, they still feel that they know each other's souls. This cut here between the two in their separate beds shows us this oneness of mind that preserved Penelope's faithfulness and drove Odysseus home to his wife. The next day we're back in the palace hall, and the suitors are enjoying their midday feast and hurling more and more insults at Beggar Odysseus. Telemachus sees one of the men throw an ox hoof at Odysseus, and he stands up to deliver a forceful speech against the man. Cyclops, you can thank your lucky stars you missed our guest. He ducked your blow, by God. Else I would have planted my sharp spear in your bowels. Your father would have been busy with your funeral, not your wedding here. Enough. Don't let me see any more offenses in my house, not from anyone. I'm alive to it all now, the good and the bad. The boy you knew is gone. No more of your crimes against me, please. Guests treated to blows, men dragging the serving women through our noble house, exploiting them all, no shame. This is another step for Telemachus in his hero's journey. It's the last great speech that he gives to the suitors, and it shows him as a man. He says he won't tolerate this lawlessness in his house. And he makes it clear that the price for lawlessness is death. He says directly, the boy you knew is gone. And he enumerates two of their crimes, mistreating a guest, the beggar Odysseus, and taking advantage of the serving women. The suitors are stunned into silence, and they appeal to him to push his mother into a marriage, and he says he won't do it. At different moments in the Odyssey, the suitors have laughed off Telemachus. But here Athena strikes them with a different kind of laughter. Athena set off uncontrollable laughter in the suitors, crazed them out of their minds. Mad, hysterical laughter seemed to break from the jaws of strangers, not their own, and the meat they were eating oozed red with blood. Tears flooded their eyes, hearts possessed by grief. We saw tremendous violence in the Iliad, but I think these words here are one of the earliest surviving literary depictions of horror. There's a psychological component to horror, the way that true horror seems to twist reality. The meat oozes blood. The uncontrollable laughter breaks the jaws. In Book 21, Penelope enters the palace hall with Odysseus' bow to issue the challenge. Listen to me, my overbearing friends, you who plague this palace night and day, drinking, eating us out of house and home, with the lord and master absent, gone so long. The only excuse that you can offer is your zest to win me as your bride. So to arms, my gallants. Here is the prize at issue right before you. Look, I set before you the great bow of King Odysseus now, the hand that can string this bow with the greatest ease, that shoots an arrow clean through all 12 axes. He is the man I follow, yes, forsaking this house where I was once a bride, this gracious house so filled with the best that life can offer. I shall always remember it, that I know, even in my dreams. It's a dramatic speech, the way that she presents herself so openly as a prize to be won in competition. I think there's more to it though. There's a remembrance here of a happier time in this house, so filled with the best that life can offer. What is the best that life can offer? It recalls the way that Odysseus spoke to Nausicaa in Book 6 about the greatest gift in life. And may the good gods give you all your heart desires, husband and house, and lasting harmony too. No finer, greater gift in the world than that, when man and woman possess their home, two minds, two hearts that work as one. Despair to their enemies, a joy to their friends, their own best claim to glory. I think this is what Penelope is referring to when she says, this gracious house so filled with the best that life can offer. She's referencing this Homophrosyne that comes when man and woman possess their home, two minds, two hearts that work as one. And she ends here wistfully, saying that she'll always remember this in her dreams. Just last night, she had a dream that she was in this very house with Odysseus. That memory of the Homophrosyne with her husband feels closer than ever. One by one, the suitors try and fail to string the bow. Telemachus himself says he'll try. He tries and fails 3 times, and Homer tells us clearly that he would have strung it on the 4th try, but his father shook his head to stop him. This is the penultimate step in the hero's journey of Telemachus. We know that stringing this bow is the test of a great man, and Telemachus would have strung it had his father not intervened. Odysseus slips outside to speak with the cowherd and swineherd, his 2 loyal servants who have been kind to him even disguised as a beggar. He reveals his identity to them, he thanks them for their kindness, and they're excited to fight alongside him against the suitors. When Odysseus goes back in the hall, the suitors have had their fill for the day, and they say they'll offer sacrifices to the archer god Apollo, then return again tomorrow to try again with the bow. Beggar Odysseus says this is a good plan, and asks if he can give it a try just for fun. And the suitors don't like this. Homer tells us that this request sent them all into hot, indignant rage, fearing he just might string the polished bow. The suitors saw Odysseus's enormous strength when he fought against the beggar Iris, and they fear he might actually be strong enough to string the bow. Penelope intervenes to take pressure off the suitors. She says that she'll send off the beggar if he succeeds, which implies she won't marry him. Remember, we don't know if Penelope knows that Odysseus is the beggar. If she does know the beggar's Odysseus, she's doing anything she can to get the bow in his hands. If she doesn't know the beggar's Odysseus, I still think she wants the beggar to string the bow, because it will bring dishonor to the suitors. If these aristocratic suitors from great families fail, but a beggar succeeds, what does that say about them? Now Telemachus cuts in aggressively and rudely. He says, "Mother, go back to your quarters, tend to your own tasks, the distaff and the loom, and keep the women working hard as well. As for the bow now, men will see to that, but I most of all, I hold the reins of power in this house." A lot has been written and debated about the appearance of these lines in the Greek text. Penelope is insulted by her son, and she retreats to her bedchambers, and I think that is the point. If you give Telemachus the benefit of the doubt, he has to jump in so aggressively here because he knows the slaughter is going to start as soon as Odysseus gets the bow, and he needs to get his mother and her maids to safety, and insulting her is one way to do it. These same lines appear in Book 1 also, after Penelope weeps uncontrollably when the bard tells a story about the war at Troy. All the way back to ancient times, scholars have debated whether these lines should also be included in Book 1. Some of the ancient Greek manuscripts omitted these lines, and there's a literary argument that these lines are much too aggressive for Telemachus's character in Book 1. I agree with this. For his character development, it's much better to save this moment for Book 21, to show him fully controlling his household before his father lays waste to the suitors. Odysseus gets hold of the bow, and he's so methodical, inspecting the integrity of the wood before he strings it. He wonders if worms had chewed through the wood in the 20 years since he used it. And as he's inspecting the bow, the suitors are laughing and jeering at him, mocking him as if he was a connoisseur of bows. So they mocked, but Odysseus, mastermind in action, once he'd handled the great bow and scanned every inch, then, like an expert singer skilled at lyre and song, who strains a string to a new peg with ease, making the pliant sheep gut fast at either end. So, with his virtuoso ease, Odysseus strung his mighty bow. Quickly, his right hand plucked the string to test its pitch, and under his touch, it sang out clear and sharp as a swallow's cry. Horror swept through the suitors, faces blanching white, and Zeus cracked the sky with a bolt, his blazing sign. And the great man who had borne so much rejoiced at last that the son of cunning Cronus flung that omen down for him. He snatched a winged arrow lying bare on the board. The rest still bristled deep inside the quiver, soon to be tasted by all the feasters there. This is incredible writing. We have the Homeric simile of Odysseus handling and stringing this bow with ease, like an expert singer strings a lyre. And Fagles extends this musical imagery by saying Odysseus strung the bow with virtuoso ease. There's a technique to stringing this bow, and this is a payoff for Penelope. When the suitors hear the challenge from Penelope, they think this is a test of strength, when it's actually more of a test of intellect. That cunning is what Penelope needs in a husband, and that cunning is how Odysseus can string the bow so easily. In this great moment, Odysseus gets an omen from Zeus, a crack of his bolt. And this is what Odysseus promised his son, that they'd fight with Athena and Zeus by their side. And again, the writing here leaves us with this image of all the other arrows still in Odysseus's quiver, soon to be tasted by all the feasters there. It's foreshadowing the slaughter that's coming, but it's also using language that relates to their crimes, years of indulgence in Odysseus's halls, and their last feast will be one of blood. Finally, in Book 22, the slaughter begins. With the bow strung, Odysseus leaps up to a threshold and thunders out to the suitors. Look, your crucial test is finished, now, at last. But another target's left that no one's hit before. We'll see if I can hit it. Apollo, give me glory. And he lets an arrow fly from the bow and hits the most vile suitor, Antinous, through the throat as he's drinking from his cup. The poetic justice of this is amazing, to get him in the throat while he's in the act of drinking Odysseus's wine. The suitors watch this happen, and then they fly into a panic. Groping, frantic, each one persuading himself the guest had killed the man by chance. Poor fools, blind to the fact that all their necks were in the noose, their doom sealed. With a dark look, the wily fighter Odysseus shouted back, "You dogs! You never imagined I'd return from Troy, so cocksure that you bled my house to death, ravished my serving women, wooed my wife behind my back while I was still alive. No fear of the gods who rule the skies up there, no fear that men's revenge might arrive someday. Now all your necks are in the noose, your doom is sealed." Odysseus is having his fun here and raging, but he's also enumerating their crimes. And he's passing the sentence too, saying that these crimes are punishable by the wrath of the gods and the revenge of man. Eurymachus, the other lead suitor, is quick to try and reason with Odysseus. I found this really funny. He offers to tax the people of his home country so that he can pay Odysseus back for all that he ate and drank. But Odysseus is having none of it. "No, Eurymachus, not if you paid me all your father's wealth, all you possess now, and all that could pour in from the world's end. No, not even then would I stay my hands from slaughter, till all you suitors had paid for all your crimes. Now, life or death, your choice, fight me or flee, if you hope to escape your sudden bloody doom." We had a similar line in the Iliad when Achilles was avenging the death of his friend Patroclus, and the Trojan prince Lycaon begs for his life and promises wealth from his father. And Achilles tells him there's no sense appealing it. He says, "Come, friend, you too must die." As this chaos is unfolding, the suitors realize they're locked in the room, and they start to make sense of who is fighting with Odysseus. They see the cowherd and the swineherd and Telemachus and Theoclymenus, and they're all fighting with Odysseus. And they see Athena approaching, but she's disguised as the old man Mentor. And they first try to reason with Mentor to motivate him to their cause. But then they threaten Mentor, and they're not realizing that they're actually threatening a god. And now Athena, looming out of the rafters high above them, brandished her man-destroying shield of thunder, terrifying the suitors out of their minds. And down the hall they panicked wild, like herds stampeding, driven mad as the darting gadfly strikes in the late spring when the long days come round. The attackers struck like eagles, crook-clawed, hook-beaked, swooping down from a mountain ridge to harry smaller birds that skim across the flatland. Cringing under the clouds, but the eagles plunge in fury, rip their lives out, hopeless, never a chance of flight or rescue, and people love the sport. So the attackers routed suitors headlong down the hall, wheeling into the slaughter, slashing left and right, and grisly screams broke from skulls cracked open, the whole floor awash with blood. In passages like this, you can feel the power of the Homeric simile. Even though this 7-line simile is describing a herd and birds, you can visualize exactly the violence in that room. In these poetic recitations, there are no pictures like we have in a movie, and you don't want to lose the pace by describing every small detail. So the poet references an action that each audience member would have their own memory of, like the sight of an eagle swooping. And he trusts the audience to adapt that memory and imagine the terror in that room. Odysseus and his men make a mess, so he asks his old nurse which of the maids are loyal. 12 of the 50 maids committed crimes, and Odysseus has them fetched to clean up the mess, and then he has his son and the herdsmen pass their sentence outside. And with all 108 suitors eliminated, Odysseus lights a fire and starts to fumigate his house. This is also the resolution of the hero's journey of Telemachus. Back in Book 1, Athena told Telemachus he needed to behave like a man and rid his household of these suitors. Telemachus and his father together have accomplished this. The slaughter of the suitors is such a shocking amount of violence. And when you read it in the poem, something about it feels good. I don't think this violence feels good for its own sake, but because that violence is earned. It's justice. This is the theme we'll interrogate next month with the Greek tragedy of the Oresteia. Is vengeance really the same thing as justice? In Book 23, we get the full reunion of Odysseus and Penelope. She hears from her most trusted maid that Odysseus is back and that he's defeated all the suitors. And there's a twist here, because the maid tells Penelope that Telemachus has known that the beggar really was Odysseus and that they conspired together. Penelope doesn't show it, but she has to be insulted that her son found out about Odysseus before she did, and that her husband and her son conspired to keep the secret from her. Even the maid knew about it before Penelope did. Odysseus didn't trust Penelope. Should Penelope trust him? As she approaches the main entrance hall, she's thinking about how she'll approach the reunion. Penelope started down from her lofty room, her heart in turmoil, torn. Should she keep her distance, probe her husband, or rush up to the man at once and kiss his head and cling to both his hands? Before she even enters the room, we know this is going to be far from a Hollywood reunion. This is what she's turning over in her head. Does she give in to the joy of the reunion with her husband, or does she restrain that joy and exercise prudence? She's wondering if she should test and probe her husband. Probe for what, though? This is the ugly side of cunning that I mentioned earlier. If you're cunning, it's so hard for you to trust. We're going to see her go on and on in Book 23, testing her husband. And it feels like a rejection of Odysseus. He's fought 20 years to get back here, and she isn't quick to accept him. It feels like she's rejecting the main character of our story. But we have to remember that for the last 8 books, he's been keeping a secret from her because he didn't fully trust her. He sat down with her face to face the night before the bow challenge and had a whole conversation and lied to her face with this fake backstory. Odysseus thinks he is justified because the fate that befell Agamemnon at the hands of his wife Clytemnestra, and because he needed to find a way to eliminate the suitors. But Penelope doesn't know any of this. She just knows that her husband lied to her. So I think it's understandable for her to approach this situation with caution. As soon as she stepped across the stone threshold, slipping in, she took a seat at the closest wall and, radiant in the firelight, faced Odysseus now. There he sat, leaning against the great central column, eyes fixed on the ground, waiting, poised for whatever words his hardy wife might say when she caught sight of him. A long while she sat in silence. Numbing wonder filled her heart as her eyes explored his face. One moment he seemed Odysseus to the life. The next, no. He was not the man she knew. A huddled mass of rags was all she saw. So she has a non-reaction when she sees him. He's still in rags, having just fumigated the palace hall. And we're seeing here this theme of identity, and how identity changes over time and in different circumstances. One moment, he seems like her Odysseus, but in another moment, he's just a hulking man in rags. And her son Telemachus thinks this is unbelievable. "Oh mother, cruel mother, you with your hard heart, what other wife could have a spirit so unbending, holding back from her husband, home at last for her after bearing 20 years of brutal struggle?" But Penelope says that if this man truly is Odysseus, she'll know. We too have secret signs, known to us both but hidden from the world. Now Odysseus cuts in here, and he acknowledges that he's filthy, covered in grime from the slaughter, and dressed in rags, and he accepts the testing. Odysseus, long enduring, broke into a smile and turned to his son with pointed, winging words. "Leave your mother here in the hall to test me, as she will. She soon will know me better. Now, because I am filthy, wear such grimy rags, she spurns me. Your mother still can't bring herself to believe I am her husband." I think Odysseus smiles at Penelope's test because he knows his wife. It's the Homophrosyne, this oneness of mind. Of course she will test him, because it's what the cunning Odysseus would do. Odysseus bathes and changes into fine robes, and Athena lavishes a splendor on him, and he returns to face his wife, looking every bit like the grand Odysseus who set sail for Troy 20 years ago. And they have this exchange of dialogue, which precipitates the test. Odysseus tells her, "Strange woman, so hard. The gods of Olympus made you harder than any other woman in the world. What other wife could have a spirit so unbending, holding back from her husband, home at last for her after bearing 20 years of brutal struggle? Come, nurse, make me a bed, I'll sleep alone. She has a heart of iron in her breast." 3 of these lines here are a direct lift from the speech by Telemachus. Odysseus had smiled at the idea of the test and told his son that his wife couldn't recognize him in this filth. But now that he's bathed and his appearance is restored, he confronts his wife. It's possible that he really is insulted by her coldness. It's also possible, though, that he wants to trigger the test. He's saying he'll go sleep alone, so if you're going to test me, let's get on with it. And her response mirrors his. "Strange man," wary Penelope said. "I'm not so proud, so scornful, nor am I overwhelmed by your quick change. You look, how well I know, the way he looked, setting sail from Ithaca years ago aboard the long-oared ship." The parallel here between strange man and strange woman gets at this idea of identity, the strangeness of seeing someone you once knew so intimately for the first time in 20 years. She tells him, "Yes, you look exactly like Odysseus, but I'm not overwhelmed by it." And she asks her maid to move their marriage bed to a different room for Odysseus to sleep in. And this is the test. Odysseus tells her he built the bed himself from the wood of an olive tree, and he knows the bed is fastened into the frame of the house and can't be moved. And finally, Penelope has the proof she needs. "Odysseus, don't fault me, angry with me now because I failed at the first glimpse to greet you, hold you so. In my heart of hearts, I always cringed with fear some fraud might come, beguile me with his talk. The world is full of the sort, cunning ones who plot their own dark ends." She's telling us explicitly here that she's aware of the cunning ways of others, and this has made it so hard for her to trust. But all is well now that he's identified the bed that only he has seen. But now, since you have revealed such overwhelming proof, the secret sign of our bed, which no one's ever seen but you and I and a single handmaid, you've conquered my hard heart, at last. This is the thing about being a cunning character. I don't know if I trust her. What is the correct response to her test? Odysseus says the bed can't be moved because it's fastened to the frame of the house. And she says that she now knows the man before her truly is Odysseus because no other man has seen their marriage bed. Did she really need to test him? Or did she make up this convoluted test knowing he would pass it so that she could give a response to reinforce that she has been faithful to him, to tell him that he passed her test because no other man has known her bed? When she finally accepts Odysseus, we get a description of the feeling of the reunion between the two of them. The more she spoke, the more a deep desire for tears welled up inside his breast. He wept as he held the wife he loved, the soul of loyalty, in his arms at last. Joy, warm as the joy that shipwrecked sailors feel when they catch sight of land. Poseidon has struck their well-rigged ship on the open sea with gale winds and crushing walls of waves, and only a few escape, swimming, struggling out of the frothing surf to reach the shore, their bodies crusted with salt, but buoyed up with joy as they plant their feet on solid ground again, spared a deadly fate. In the English from Fagles and from many other translators, this emotion is described as Odysseus's emotion. But in the Greek text, this is actually Penelope's emotion, which makes the simile so much stronger. This is the great moment of Homophrosyne between Odysseus and Penelope. When they're finally reunited, the feeling that she has is the exact same feeling Odysseus felt when he put his feet on solid ground again. We saw this back in Book 5, after Odysseus is shipwrecked by Poseidon, and he floats about on the sea trying to reach the shores of Scheria, the home of the Phaeacian people. So warm Odysseus' joy when he saw that shore, those trees, as he swam on, anxious to plant his feet on solid ground again. Odysseus and Penelope have been physically separated for 20 years, but her feeling of being reunited with him echoes this description he felt of finding safety on the open seas. This is the oneness of mind for these two characters. We've seen so many times in the Odyssey that men crave to be understood, and we've seen all the cheap ways to feel understood by living in the past, by intoxicating yourself on the song of the Sirens or the tales of the bard, or by wasting your days with your fellow war dogs trading stories. Homer shows us in the Odyssey, through the character of Odysseus, that there is a greater form of understanding, Homophrosyne. This understanding is not rooted in the past. It exists in the present, from two souls who understand each other even if they have not had a shared past. In this emotion that Penelope describes, she is feeling the past events that Odysseus experienced, even though she wasn't there. This is the depth of their Homophrosyne. Book 24 begins with the god Hermes guiding the souls of the suitors to the underworld. This is Hermes' role as the guide of souls, which is the greatest Greek word in history, psychopomp. It comes from psyche, which is soul, and pompos, which is guide. Psychopomp. Down in the underworld, Achilles and Agamemnon are trading war stories, and they notice this enormous group of men accompanied by Hermes. And Agamemnon goes up to one of them and asks what happened, that so many of them died together. And the suitor tells Agamemnon the whole story of courting Penelope and Odysseus' return home. And when the suitor tells the story, he says that Odysseus told Penelope to lay the trap of stringing the bow. This is a different story than what we saw happen in Book 19. In Book 19, Penelope came up with the idea herself, but the suitors here think that she and Odysseus must have conspired. The suitors think Agamemnon will be sympathetic to them because they were betrayed by a cunning woman, Penelope, just like Agamemnon was betrayed by a cunning woman, his wife Clytemnestra. But Agamemnon is so happy for his friend Odysseus and so proud of Penelope. Odysseus, mastermind, what a fine, faithful wife you won. What good sense resided in your Penelope. The fame of her great virtue will never die. The immortal gods will lift a song for all mankind, a glorious song in praise of self-possessed Penelope. A far cry from the daughter of Tyndareus. Clytemnestra, what outrage she committed, killing the man she married once. Yes, and the song men sing of her will ring with loathing. Agamemnon says the immortal gods will sing a song in praise of Penelope, and they'll sing a song of hate towards his wife Clytemnestra. Scholars point out that this song of praise is the Odyssey. It tells a story of Penelope's cunning and faithfulness. And the song of loathing Clytemnestra is Aeschylus's Oresteia, which tells the story of Clytemnestra's murder of Agamemnon, and how she is in turn murdered by her son. We're reading the Oresteia next on this channel, so make sure you subscribe. Back on Earth, Odysseus has arrived at his father Laertes' house. There's a structural note here, which is that Book 1 of the Odyssey is his son Telemachus searching for his father Odysseus. And Book 24 is a son Odysseus searching for his father Laertes. There's also a parallel that Book 24 of the Odyssey is about a father and son, and Book 24 of the Iliad was about a father and son too. When Achilles and Priam reconcile in Book 24 of the Iliad, Achilles softens towards him because Priam bears a resemblance to Achilles' own father. When we saw Achilles in the Underworld of Book 11 of the Odyssey, he fantasized about a homecoming with his father Peleus, and he wishes he could have defended his father's honor. And Odysseus gets to live out this dream in Book 24 of the Odyssey. We already saw in the Underworld in Book 11 that grief literally killed Odysseus' mother, and we hear throughout the poem what a poor state his father Laertes is in. He's described as a man who's completely lost his mind. And our man Achilles decides he'll test his father. Debating, head and heart, what should he do now? Kiss and embrace his father? Pour out the long tale, how he had made the journey home to native land? Or probe him first and test him every way? Torn, mulling it over, this seemed better. Test the old man first. Reproach him with words that cut him to the core. Translators and scholars have contorted themselves in so many ways to try and defend this from Odysseus, but I don't find any of it compelling. He goes on and on for 100 lines, testing his father to see if Laertes can recognize Odysseus. And Odysseus makes up some elaborate fake story about who he is and where he's been. And after he sees his father in such immense pain, he finally gives it up. I don't know why Odysseus does this. Part of me wonders if it's just who he is. It's the same guy who went to the Cyclops cave for no reason, and gave his real name to the Cyclops for no reason, and had a whole conversation with his wife without telling her who he was for almost no reason. Maybe it's just who he is, always playing tricks, always curious, and always testing. But this episode with his father is so upsetting when you read it. I felt like I needed a pause to try, in this last book of the poem, to really understand who this guy Odysseus is. There are some Homeric virtues that overlap with our own virtues today, like charity to beggars and hospitality, and Odysseus honors these virtues. But he also deceives and lies to everyone he comes into contact with, sometimes just for the sport of it. The emotional reaction to this behavior is to dislike Odysseus. But that's evaluating him by our standards today of what it means to be good. I think the sharper observation is to say that he feels alien in some way. And we need to look at the bizarre ways that he behaves to understand the code he lives by. Above all else, Odysseus honors the gods. He obeys Zeus and Athena, and he sacrifices to them. And Zeus and Athena themselves acknowledge this. Next, he seeks personal glory and fame. Some of this behavior we'd view as positive. He earns a good reputation by honoring his slaves. But much of this glory and fame comes at the expense of others, like when he risks the lives of his men to taunt Polyphemus for his own personal glory. He seeks wealth. He's so close to being home when he's with the Phaeacians. He knows they're going to give him a ship to sail home with, but he actually extends with them to get more gifts. And lastly, he honors his loved ones. When there's no God left to honor, no glory left to win, no wealth to be gained, that is when he puts his family first. And maybe this is what we're seeing here with his father. Through his testing, he gives his father an opportunity to win glory by recognizing Odysseus himself. And only after his father fails the tests does Odysseus' emotional care for his father supersede the opportunity for Laertes to win honor. This ordering is why Odysseus feels so alien to us as a character. He prioritizes last the thing that we prioritize first. It's worth looking at Achilles and Telemachus here too. In the Iliad, Achilles also honors the gods above all else, but he honors his loved ones second. He gives up personal glory and personal wealth, and gives up his own life to avenge his friend Patroclus. I think these actions of Achilles feel noble to us today. Even if he rages like a complete lunatic in war and desecrates the body of the fallen Prince Hector, his motivation of honoring his own loved one feels true to what we value today. In this respect, Achilles feels like a modern protagonist. John Wick incinerates his whole life to avenge his dog. The character of Liam Neeson commits enormous violence in Taken to defend his daughter, and so on. The priorities of Telemachus are maybe the most interesting. He also obeys the gods above all else. But I don't see him ranking the other three motivations so clearly, because they're all aligned for him. He wants to defend his mother and avenge his father, but his success at honoring his loved ones will win him enormous glory and preserve his wealth. Telemachus is at a stage in life where glory, wealth, and family are all intertwined, so it's harder to know what his true motivations are. After Odysseus and Laertes reunite, their focus turns to the families of the dead suitors who are coming to avenge their sons. The three generations suit up for battle: Laertes, Odysseus, and Telemachus. And we get these moments of pride between the generations. Odysseus preps his son for battle, and Laertes is so happy seeing his son and his grandson beside him. And Athena breathes enormous strength into the old man Laertes, and he hurls his spear and it plunges through the helmet of one of the Avengers' heads. And before Odysseus and Telemachus can annihilate the rest of the Avengers, Athena cries out to the fighters to stop. She has a peace decree from Zeus. The Avengers will drop the blood feud, and they'll recognize Odysseus as the rightful king of Ithaca once again. If you're still here, thank you.